Hogwarts Legacy is a fascinating game. A beautiful and chaotic mix of passion, potential, and missed opportunities. On the one hand, there's the incredible art design, the fun cast of characters, and the clear love of the development team poured into creating an authentic wizarding world to explore. It sold like wildfire, and for good reason. But, on the other hand, by the time I put the controller down after 50 hours, I felt like I had been obliviated. My joy erased into numbness. The game's main narrative and open world structure left me questioning what I even enjoyed about this world to begin with. And that's what drew me in, really. How can a game so brimming with passion feel at the same time so hollow and lifeless? It's this paradox that I wanted to dive into in this video. As often what happens with these projects, what started as a short critique quickly spiraled into something much larger. So, get comfy with your favorite niffler plush, maybe take the video in chunks, and let's explore the contradictory magic that is Hogwarts Legacy together. Let's get into it. In a twist that would make even a seasoned wizard raise an intrigued, bushy, ill-groomed eyebrow, our story begins not with the customary rush of first-year excitement. Boats pulled gracefully across the mirror surface of the Black Lake, the iconic silhouette of the castle warm and inviting against the inky black sky. Instead, we start with the unexpected arrival of a Hogwarts letter, 5 years later than usual. You, a custom-made 5th-year student, have only now been summoned to the enchanted halls of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry to begin your magical education. The mystery of your delayed invitation hangs in the air like the scent of freshly brewed pumpkin juice, promising secrets yet to be unveiled. Who are you? Where did you come from?
A good question for another time.
So right away, this setup is an odd choice. Instead of embracing the beloved origins of the wizarding world, where a wide-eyed 10 or 11-year-old receives an owl, visits Diagon Alley for school supplies, and squeezes through platform 9 3/4 to board the Hogwarts Express, the game instead opts for a contrived premise. We're introduced to a mysterious 15-year-old who's only just discovered magic, a setup that feels both arbitrary and at odds with the iconic initiation we've come to expect from the franchise. Moira Squire, narrative lead at Portkey Games, in an interview for the Making Of book, explained, quote, "If the player had arrived at Hogwarts as a first year, they would be much too young for the story we wanted to tell, and the responsibilities they'd have to shoulder. Also, we wanted to ensure that the player wouldn't be starting too late, that their story would be ending at Hogwarts before it really began, and that their new friendships would have time to develop." End quote. For me, this departure feels like a missed opportunity to properly establish our character and, cynically, mine for nostalgia. Imagine taking a page from Fallout 3's early story setup, where your character grows from youth, experiencing special moments of development that are woven into both narrative and gameplay. Hogwarts Legacy could have used those formative years, or at least snapshots of those early years, to tutorialize essential spells and character growth in a way that is deeply lore-friendly, marrying RPG progression systems with narrative threads, before settling in during a later year to deliver the main narrative. Instead of a rushed backstory, we could have witnessed our protagonist evolve through meaningful early adventures, building initial stats, forming relationships, and even facing the excitement and nerves of the sorting ceremony alongside their fellow first years. Speaking of which, at least the game does deliver on the iconic sorting ceremony, which conjures up all the fond memories of our own introductions to the wizarding world, I'm sure. Even if the particular memory it most vividly conjures for me is the time I was chosen to be Harry in Ollivander's wand shop at the Wizarding World in Orlando, Florida, as a grumpy 16-year-old, surrounded by kids far more excited than I was at the time. It was particularly jarring for me to think about entering the Great Hall alone, walking down the aisle as a new student and having to take on the sorting hat in complete isolation. Not even first years were around, having already completed their ceremonies, to feel some sense of comfort in others who were new to this grand, famous school. Maybe I'm just socially awkward, but the anxiety I can imagine my character going through by doing that crucial first step to becoming a Hogwarts student on my own kind of ruined the illusion and partially dragged me out of the story for a moment. I think it could have been a dream come true for millennials like me who grew up reading the Harry Potter books and watching the films to have that authentic Hogwarts experience. After the sorting ceremony, we're robbed of the chance to sit and eat a magical banquet meal at our house table and to make a new friend or two before being directed to our common room by our prefect. Instead, because of your tardiness, you're taken to your common room by Matilda Weasley, the deputy headmistress and the ancestor of our favourites from the original series. This special treatment sort of dampened the fantasy a little. It feels like you're being rushed through the truly magical bits in order to get back to the generic action plotline. Anyway, the story is set in the year 1890. A smart way of removing those nagging inconveniences of expectations a book reader or film watcher may be coming in with is in setting the story firmly in the past. This way, the Portkey Studios team have a relatively blank slate to work with, while the period is not so far removed as to shut off those references to the familiar. Throughout this adventure, Weasleys, Gaunts, and Pruitts are all used to ground us in something ultimately recognizable and comforting. I will be forever impressed that the writers resisted a Dumbledore cameo or two. I think that there is a potential criticism around leaning hard on nostalgia, but for me at least, these recognizable wizarding families have historical precedent as ancient wizarding households. I think it's a good grounding to include them, and their absence would have been strange. For a sequel, maybe you could even chuck in some more of the Sacred 28 references, perhaps a Carrow or two, maybe an Abbott or a Flint for good measure. So, if you're new to my work, you might not know that I get distracted by weird details in media, and well, this is one of them. Fig, the first character you meet who becomes the player's mentor, well, he looks an awful lot like a couple of other Warner Bros. Games characters. If you've played Shadow of Mordor, there's a tricksy little orc called Ratbag, whose character model is eerily similar to Fig for me. Sans the green skin, obviously. Fig also has the unfortunate distinction of looking like Captain Boomerang in the infamous, though simply okay, 2024 Suicide Squad game. It's a pretty low-stakes conspiracy, but it is weird that it happened twice. It also had the unfortunate knock-on effect of making me distrust Fig throughout the adventure. I was constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, and for Fig to betray us, revealing he had been working with Ranrok the whole time. Maybe that's just me. So, Fig has his meeting with a George Osric in an alley at the start of the game, a supposedly trusty ministry figure who has been in regular correspondence with Fig's late wife Miriam. He was, according to the art book anyway, a Hufflepuff, meaning he must be trustworthy. Just don't get too attached to this guy. In a secret alleyway, in a generic part of London, you and Fig await the first chapter of your adventure. It is here that George reveals a copy of the plot. A copy of the Daily Prophet. Its front page ablaze with news of Ranrock's Goblin rebellion, a threat as colossal as it is mysterious. But the intrigue quickly deepens, of course. George clutches a small, glowing item sent by Elazar's late wife Miriam, along with a desperate plea from a time now past. Poor Miriam Fig, devoting her entire life to studying ancient magic, only to discover it was as useful to her as a chocolate teapot. Here she was, hunted, and eventually killed by Ranrok for her research, yet she never even had the innate ability to see the very traces of ancient magic, the only thing she actually needed in the first place. In a world where only 3 witches or wizards in history can do that, Miriam's lifelong quest ended up being about as pointless as trying to fill a cauldron with moonlight. A random 15-year-old manages to accomplish more in 15 minutes than Miriam did in her entire, tragically futile career. Talk about an existential abyss. The poor woman spent her days hunting for magic she could never even perceive, while a kid breezed through it all like it was a pop quiz. On a more serious note, it must be truly excruciating to dedicate your entire life, and your spouse's too, to studying something you'll never fully understand. Poor Miriam spent her days chasing the elusive traces of ancient magic, never to realize she couldn't even see a spark of it. And here I am, pouring my heart and soul into writing about video games, a medium which I can neither create nor truly grasp the wizardry behind the magic that goes into one. Moving swiftly on. So, with a mere touch, you unlock the item's secret, revealing a mysterious key that pulses with latent, ancient magic. Before the significance of this discovery can fully register, fate, of course, takes a dramatic turn. An evil possessed dragon, its scales shimmering with malice, suddenly descends upon your carriage. In the ensuing chaos, destruction reigns. George's half of the carriage is obliterated, and in the scramble, you and Fig are hurled into the open air. With flames licking the remnants of the carriage, Fig's steady voice rings out, urging you to grab his hand. In that split second, he summons the enchanted key, to reveal its true purpose. It is a port key. In a brilliant flash of light, you are whisked away to a mysterious cliffside in the rugged Scottish Highlands. There, amidst ancient ruins perched on a distant island, Professor Fig murmurs of destiny and history intertwined. Why the portkey deposits us so far from our destination, the mirror in the castle ruins, that acts as a portal into Gringotts, is a mystery. I guess wizards aren't the most practically minded of folks. So, after a gentle introduction to the basics of traversal, this is the place where the portkey was meant to lead. A gateway to secrets buried beneath the mists of time, and the first steps in an adventure that promises to challenge everything you thought you knew about magic, legacy, and yourself. Well, it'll try to anyway. The path to the ruins, a truly beautiful vista, gives us our first chance to get to grips with some of the key elements of the game: healing, basic climbing, and the basic cast spell. Before too long, we come across a shattered bridge hanging perilously over a chasm, its pieces scattered like lost memories. Without missing a beat, Fig sweeps his wand with a flick and casts the mending charm Reparo. The animation team are incredibly talented. I can only watch in delight as the broken bridge knits itself back together. Upon reaching the island and the ruins of some ancient, unknowable lineage, after a pretty short investigation, a hidden magical entrance reveals itself. A secret doorway that, to the student's keen eye, turned out to be a private entrance to none other than Gringotts Wizarding Bank. Seems like a bit of a doozy of a security concern that you could break into Gringotts this way, but I guess very few can see this ancient magic. A topic that we'll get onto in a bit. Check the chapter select in the video description if you want to skip ahead. Inside its gilded halls, a snoozing goblin banker stirs at their arrival. Prompted by the student's gentle reminder, Fig hands over the portkey, and in a whirl of goblin efficiency, the banker rushes them onto a creaky minecart that chugs along through the labyrinthine corridors, caverns, and through the ever-watchful thief's downfall, a familiar sight to book and film fans. Though this waterfall never made a lot of sense to me personally. If I'm a thief trying to break in, I'm not using the officially designated minecart to do so. Especially not in a world where I can fly in a gust of black smoke. As they clatter along, a second goblin catches the student's eye. Specifically their armband, which is aglow with the same mysterious red light as the dragon's collar. His dismay is palpable when he learns that they are bound for Vault 12, yet, with a resigned nod he allows them to pass. At last, they arrive before the ancient vault. The banker, his eyes twinkling with both reverence and surprise, confides that no one has dared approach Vault 12 for centuries. With a deliberate motion, he uses the key to unlock the vault door and, in accordance with his strict instructions, relocks it immediately after Fig and the student step inside. Maybe a reference to Griphook's antics in the Deathly Hallows book. I guess goblins are just fans of escape rooms. Within the vault's depths, Fig turns teacher once again, introducing the Revelio charm, a charm we will get altogether too intimate with by the end of the game. Still, at this point the animation is beautiful, so with a graceful incantation the student unveils hidden passages and secret contours etched into the very walls of the vault. Together they enter the mines of Moria. A radiant glow on the floor beckons. The student, unable to resist, activates its magic and watches in awe as the floor transforms before their eyes. With a flick of their wand, the student reveals a mysterious statue, whose reflection on the enchanted floor seems to defy logic. As Fig strolls about casting Lumos to trace the shifting luminescence, the student notices that the statue's reflection rotates to align with the slight's source. Encouraged by Fig, the student replicates the charm, adjusting the reflection until it springs to life, solving the light puzzle. One that, unfortunately, is only infrequently utilized again. And our heroes are joined by a cadre of animated statues that they are forced to battle. I'll talk about the combat system specifically a little later in the video, but for now I just wanted to note that one of the most fundamental elements of combat in Legacy, the basic cast, highlights the strange whiplash between slavish devotion to the established lore and anachronistic gaming elements that pop up every so often. It makes sense that you need some kind of simple attack function, separated from the spells that have specific effects. But even the name, the basic cast, speaks to an odd overlooking of details that is clumsy and a little shocking in a big AAA game that comes as a canon release within a wider universe with an established lore. It sounds like a behind-the-scenes placeholder, awaiting an official name. It won't be the only instance of this either. Even something like Stupefy would have been better than basic cast. As I say, there's another odd case of this phenomenon later in the game, but we'll get there. Either way, I initially enjoyed the combat quite a bit. It's a fun mix of Batman Arkham-style attacks and parries with wonderful animations rendering it all in a unique style befitting the universe of Harry Potter. Sure, enemies are a little spongy in the beginning, but I'm sure it'll evolve and improve as we learn more spells. In the ensuing chaos of knight statue combat, Fig's warning to stay close rings out too late. He is suddenly whisked away, leaving the student to fend off another surge of animated statues alone. Reunited moments later, they find themselves in the presence of a pensieve and a mysterious bottle of memories. With a mix of reverence and urgency, Fig pours the memories into the pensieve. Together they peer into the swirling depths and witness two wizards, Percival Rackham and Charles Rookwood, constructing the vault, their hushed voices discussing a hidden path meant for a chosen few. It is then that Fig realizes that the student possesses a rare gift, the ability to sense the ancient magic that had cost Miriam and George their lives. Before they can fully process the revelation of the player's innate ability, the air grows thick with menace. Ranrok, flanked by the earlier goblins and a few more ominous figures, bursts into the chamber, demanding they surrender the Rackham memory vial that they've uncovered. The tension escalates when the goblin banker, steadfast in his duty, is ruthlessly slain by Ranrock's hand. Fig's refusal to yield only stokes the fire of conflict, and soon spells are flying in rapid succession. In the ensuing battle, Ranrock's raw power blasts both Fig and the student, sending them reeling. At that moment, as luck would have it, a pensive guardian long dormant awakes, leaping into action to engage Ranrock, as Fig and the student seize the opportunity to slip through a magically conjured doorway. After finally escaping the clutches of Ranrock's pursuit, we emerge from all the overwrought, over-engineered setup, and it's as if a weight is lifted. The moment we've all been waiting for arrives, the iconic pan up to the castle. The theme swells, well, more like a weird off-key version of the theme, but it's close enough to strike that chord inside us. And just like that, all the cluttered nonsense about goblin rebellions, ancient magic and mysterious prophecies, all of it is instantly forgotten, buried beneath the mountain of nostalgia. The grand setup, a mere backdrop for what truly matters. Being back in those hallowed halls, where the real magic can finally begin. You and Fig emerge near the storied walls of Hogwarts Castle, alive and mostly unharmed, untraumatized by what you've just witnessed. Outside the Great Hall, the resonant sounds of the sorting ceremony reach their ears. Fig, eager to keep things hush-hush for now, resolves to report the dire news, George's fate, Ranrok's violent actions, and their perilous journey to the Ministry of Magic, asking Eleanor to keep all that has transpired to herself. He swings open the grand doors, catching the attention of Professor Black. As Black strides towards them, his presence alone commanding silence, he warns the student to steel themselves for the unwelcome headmaster's arrival. With a brusque dismissal of Fig's explanations, Professor Black declares that the sorting ceremony is over. Simon Pegg does a great job at chewing the scenery and commanding a loathsome presence immediately. While the student is ushered into the Great Hall to be sorted, Fig promises, with a twinkle of determination in his eye, that he will remain in touch. So begins your own personal Harry Potter journey, a tale of delayed beginnings, awkward friendships, uneven and tonally oscillating plots, fantasy armor-clad goblins and perilous dragons. A story that attempts to set up an ambitious, grand adventure that grows too far outside of the soul of what makes this universe so intriguing. Okay, so this is where the narrative starts to diverge down three distinct paths that, for me, never satisfyingly converge. You have the ancient magic and the tragic life of Isidora Morganach, the tale of Ranrok and his evil army attempting to invade Hogwarts, and the escapades of a first-year student at Hogwarts trying to learn charms and make friends. I've broken the narrative analysis into those three branches, so please use the chapter feature to navigate around any section that you want to. Let's start with, I think, the weightiest narrative thread, Isidora. I'll quickly sum up her arc and then we'll unpack why I think it feels so out of reach and unsatisfying. So, in the swirling silvery pool of memory, let's plunge our heads into the past, into the Pensieve to unfurl the story of Isidora Morganach, a witch whose life, both luminous and tragic, gives us a window into understanding this concept of ancient magic. We begin this questline following a trip to the restricted section within the Hogwarts Library with Sebastian to find an ancient magic portal, a hidden antechamber straight out of Destiny 2's Dreaming City, and a book, holding some memories of the young Isidora, giving us a first small glimpse into her narrative. Born during the Tudor era in the modest hamlet of Felcroft, Isidora was no ordinary child. She possessed a rare gift, the ability to detect and wield ancient magic, a power as mysterious as the whispered legends of old. When a brutal drought gripped her village, casting long shadows over its people, the Keepers, esteemed professors of Hogwarts including Percival Rackham, Neve Fitzgerald, Charles Rookwood and Sang Bakar, arrived in a burst of spellbound light. And with a flourish of their wands, they banished the drought and transformed Felcroft into a land of lush fertility, exhibiting a power unlike any we've seen in previous installments of the Wizarding World. Amidst the rushing water from a newly revived well, young Isidora watched in awe as Percival demonstrated the true essence of ancient magic, a moment that would forever define her destiny. At Hogwarts years later, Isidora's abilities finally began to blossom, albeit on that delayed timeline. Much like Percival Rackham had decades before, and the player character many decades later, she entered the school in her 5th year and was sorted into Ravenclaw, a house we'll come to associate with character traits of wisdom and curiosity. It wasn't long before Headmistress Neve Fitzgerald and the Keepers themselves recognized her unique potential. In a solemn meeting, they declared that she was the first since Percival to manifest the gift of ancient magic, and must therefore learn to control it under strict guidance. After that short glimpse, we are pulled out of the scene, back into the antechamber. Conveniently, the book is missing pages that would lead to another quest with the ghost of Richard Jackdaw. After playing with friendly Casper and completing a fun puzzle quest involving perspective shifting and mirror dimensions, a feature that doesn't get utilized often enough through the rest of the game for me, we arrive in the map chamber under Hogwarts and meet the living portrait of Professor Percival Rackham. Here he trusts you with another pensive memory, in which you learn of Isidora's desires to remove her father's pain following her brother's death. Her relationship with Rackham has developed, now that she has become a student of Hogwarts, and is one that parallels your connection to Fig. Under Percival's careful tutelage, Isidora has started to hone her powers, preparing herself for the trials ahead. Yet the tapestry of her life was not without its dark threads. As I mentioned, early in her life, tragedy struck with the untimely death of her brother, a loss that clearly carved a deep and unhealable wound in both her and her father's hearts, and set her on a path towards unlocking her formidable powers. On discovering Isidora's abilities and intentions, Rackham claims that her father's grief is not hers to take. This is going to be a recurring critique of this section and Legacy's narrative more broadly, I suppose, but the fact that you can't question the Keepers, Rackham, on why they didn't intervene with Isidora, or try to support her in her grief, constantly pulled me out of the narrative. So many of these pensive memories end on one of the Keepers watching Isidora walk away in defiance, having just declared that she's stealing people's souls. And the Keepers never once tried to talk her down or engage in a heart-to-heart. And they're the good guys, right? By this point in the playthrough, I had fully decided I wanted to have my character Eleanor follow the path of the dark side, to see what, if anything, I could do to question the Keepers and their roles in Isidora's downfall. Within the memory, there is then a time jump, and Isidora is revealed to be Hogwarts' Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. She tells the other Keepers to visit her home in Feldcroft that evening. She has gained new knowledge she'd like to share with them. The player is again pulled out of the memory, this time to meet Charles Rookwood. As a quick aside here, the naming system here is relentlessly confusing. It's a constant head-scratcher. Do we really need names so similar as Ranrok, Rackham, and two different Rookwoods? It's almost as perplexing as Elden Ring's naming conventions, with similar sounding names like Ralana, Renala, Radagon, Rykard, Radan, Rani, Godric, Godfrey, Godefroy, Godwin, Gideon, Melina, Millennia, Mikola, Marika, Malekith, Margit, and Moog. Anyway, the making of book provides a short description of Charles's character. I'll provide that in full here. Quote, Charles Rookwood considered himself a man of science, as much as a wizard can be, and Percival Rackham's closest friend. Where Rackham is guided by an emotional intuition, however, Rookwood turns to hard facts. A loyal friend to Rackham and the other Keepers, he is also pragmatic, direct and focused. Rookwood is keenly observant and fascinated by the ways in which magic can be altered and used. Okay, so I don't think this characterization comes across particularly in the game, which, for me, is such a missed opportunity. Rookwood, with a more pragmatic approach, could have served as an ideal character to offer an alternative perspective on Isidora's controversial use of magic to remove pain. In the game, Isidora's actions are portrayed as unequivocally wrong from the get-go. But in reality, her desire to alleviate pain and suffering, though we see is ultimately dangerous, doesn't inherently make her evil. I know from my own struggles with depression, if someone offered me a way of removing that strain, I'd at least consider it. A character like Rookwood might have found some degree of curiosity in her methods, or at the very least been hesitant to dismiss them entirely. His alignment with Isidora, even if temporary, would have provided a more compelling and emotionally loaded conflict with Rackham too. This could have created a real narrative tension, with Rookwood acting as a subtle devil's advocate in the debate over whether magic should or could be used to alter a person so wholly. The game sidesteps this opportunity to complicate the moral landscape and interrogate potentially valid impulses. Instead of offering a more diverse viewpoint, it leaves Isidora as a one-sided villain. when in fact the questions she raises about magic could have made for a much richer storyline. Anyway, with that potential avenue avoided, we're sent on another trial, this time to the ruined grounds of the Rookwood estate. And similar to the last trial, it plays around with perspective, challenging you to think outside of the box, while you fight more statues. On completing the trial, you dip your head once again into the pensieve to uncover the secret that Isidora showed the keepers, the ability to remove a subject's pain and bottle it up. In an act both daring and heart-wrenching, she performed a spell before her peers, hoping to lift the sorrow that had clouded her childhood. While her father, who has been mute for years, thanks her for the act, the keepers express their concern over this uncharted magic and its potentially sinister applications. After exiting Rookwood's memory, you meet Neve Fitzgerald's portrait and receive instructions for a third trial. This one takes a different approach than the previous two. Firstly, you're required to sneak into the Hogwarts headmaster's study under the guise of Professor Black. This is a fun and creative sequence, which provides a little whimsy in the face of the more serious themes of the story, and harkens back to the mischief of the early Harry Potter books and the use of Polyjuice Potion. In Professor Black's office, you find Neve's book and are swept into the monochromatic adventure, animated in a style reminiscent of the Deathly Hallows story within the 7th Harry Potter film. It's an interesting and visually distinct quest that plays much like the Scarecrow missions in Batman Arkham Asylum. The physical embodiment of death watches over the arena just like Scarecrow did, and forces the player to utilize stealth to avoid being seen. You're required to gather the Deathly Hallows, sneaking in the dark, and are only able to defeat death when you find the Elder Wand. During Neve's trial, Legacy shifts gears and adopts a black and white, hand-drawn style marked by harsh blacks and intricate pencil-scribble cross-hatching. This change is a clear visual homage that recalls that animated sequence from Deathly Hallows Part 1, where the focus on the Hallows themselves is rendered with an almost mythic gravity. This unique art style, adopted solely for Neve's trial, elevates the narrative here, if just for the moment, by transforming the familiar into something entirely fresh and evocative. It's as if the game itself is saying, here, in this moment, the stakes are different. The magic is mythical and strange. The choice to employ this aesthetic, even if just for a single sequence, speaks volumes, I think, to the dedication and creative ambition of the art team. They've crafted a moment that stands in vivid contrast to the rest of the game's look, inviting players to pause and appreciate the craftsmanship behind the magic. It's a deliberate artistic choice that not only sets this moment apart from the rest of the game, but also demonstrates the team's passion for pushing creative boundaries in a medium where it's all too rare to see such attempts. In Neve's memory, given after conquering her trial, she becomes outraged upon learning that Isidora has continued her experiments, and has even developed a method of properly containing the taken magic, since it had previously been housed within the vials that are stored in her home. Even the most noble of intentions can spiral into danger when left unchecked. The pain, vast and uncontained, became too much for even Isidora's formidable magic. So in order to safeguard her work, and perhaps to hide it from prying eyes, she secretly commissioned Bragball the Boastful, a cunning goblin and ancestor to Ranrok, to craft a final repository. A goblin silver storage unit hidden deep within the Keeper's caverns beneath Hogwarts Castle. Neve chastises her when she announces her belief that this well can be harnessed to wield more powerful magic, that her intentions are good, and that everybody is in some kind of pain. Isidora clearly sees it as her moral duty to help people by removing their pain. Why else have this immense power if not to use it for good? This conversation leads her to take a small amount of Neve's own pain, inhaling the dark traces of the magic that she draws from Neve's heart. Fitzgerald hears the warning bells of caution and reminds Isidora that magic wielded without restraint can lead to dire consequences. The memory ends with Isidora expressing her anger at the Keepers for hoarding the magic out of fear, while she means to embrace it. Neve, for her part, passively shakes her head and lets Isidora continue in her darkness, with no further action taken. As I say, an unfortunate theme that links all these flashback sequences. The Keepers each question Isidora's motives, but never decide to intervene. What is their passivity meant to signify? And how do the writers expect to ingratiate the Keepers to the player, when the Keepers are shown to be incompetent time and time again? Isidora is driven by her pain and her grief, clearly clouded in her judgment, but what are the Keepers' excuses? Either way, the player now meets San Bakar's enchanted portrait, the fourth and final keeper. Interestingly here, the player is given the choice to say they were repulsed or intrigued by the memory they've just seen. Because I wanted to see the extent of an evil playthrough, I obviously didn't hesitate to say it was fascinating. Bakar says he is hesitant to even give the location of his pensée for someone clearly evil, but he does anyway, because this game has no consequences of substance. Haunted by the growing mistrust and enmity of the keepers, it is revealed that Isidora left behind a trail of clues, an intricate triptych of canvases hidden within the secret recesses of the Undercroft that would, hopefully, shed a little light on what Isidora was hoping to achieve. Tattered pieces of her journey lay in her chosen hideouts, one in the Overlook and another in Tower Tunnel, waiting for a kindred spirit to uncover them centuries later. What connects the Undercroft with Isidora's home and past? A good question for another time. It's during Sebastian's questline, tying the side mission into the main questline, we find the missing triptych that was Isidora's portrait, as well as a memory, once we repair the missing hole. This is a replay of the night that she removed the pain from her father, but this time from her perspective. We get a little more information and again see that her father is thankful for her intervention, though an illusionary effect over the memory implies she may have tampered with it. At least, that's my interpretation of these strange visual effects. We know from Slughorn in the main Harry Potter series that it is possible to edit memories, after all. The memory then shows a meeting she had with Bragbor after the Keepers left her home, revealing that she is planning a larger application of her magic. Sebastian obviously becomes very interested in Morganac's ability to remove pain because of his sister's curse, providing some argument that what Isidora seeks to achieve is through dark means, since Sebastian's storyline is characterized as the dark arts pathway. He begs the player to at least raise this with the Keepers, but in another strange decision, the game never offered me the chance to raise this with them. I'm desperately trying not to sound too negative with this storyline, but another glaring missed opportunity in Isidora's storyline is the complete absence of any chance for the player to directly interrogate her. Now look, I know she's been dead for over a century, but if we're already delving into the dark arts and ancient magic that can seemingly do anything, why not allow us to dabble in necromancy through a connection with that ancient magic perhaps? Imagine having the option to temporarily revive Isidora, giving players a chance to get her side of the story firsthand. This could have been a fantastic role-playing moment, that moral crossroads where a principal player might shun the dark magic needed to bring her back, while a more morally ambiguous character might eagerly embrace it, in search of elusive answers, especially those that would provide you with insight into your own powers. Instead, we're left with second-hand accounts and cryptic memories that never let us engage with her directly. This narrative omittance not only robs the game of a deeper exploration of her complex legacy, but also denies players the opportunity to truly shape the story through their choices in the realm of dark magic. Anyway, later, when you return to the map chamber, Bakar decides that he has to trust you, since you've passed the other Keeper's trials, and due to the pressing nature of Ranrok's advances. The Goblin, by this stage in the story, has gathered the power from the other repositories and is trying to get to the fifth one under Hogwarts. Despite Bakar's statements about being unsure whether he can trust you, he sends you on a fourth trial, anyway. This time you're sent to the deeply underutilized southern part of the map, in which you're required to fight and tame a Graphorn, the Lord of the Shore, to prove yourself worthy. Personally, I found this to be an unbelievably tedious fight, due to the amount of health the beast has, his resistance to most of your combat spells, and the inability to parry any of his attacks. I'm not convinced that adding a combat encounter in which most of your spells are completely ineffective is ever the right play. After beating on the beast for way too long, you are, oddly, given the option to either bow to the creature or fight it into submission. But ultimately, as with most things in this game, your choice has no bearing on the quest at all, or on your relationship with the Graphorn moving forward. Once he is tamed, you unlock a fourth way to traverse the world and have to ride the beast back to the pensive room of Bakar, where we see the final memory of Isidora. San Bakar enters Isidora's home and we see the horrifying sight of Isidora's father as a husk with absent eyes. It's a frightening image that shows the depths of Isidora's madness. In terms of framing and mood, it's eerily similar to that scene from the original Resident Evil. Bakar, of course, reports this to Rackham, stating that the father is drained of all emotion, while Rackham imparts that Isidora's experiments have extended to using students as subjects. The Keepers, fearing that Isidora had transgressed too far, united against her in the hidden caverns. She tries to justify her actions, stating that she is curing people of pain and using the power for good, in opposition of the Keepers who hoard power and secrets to themselves. The Keepers attempt to stop her, with Rackham denouncing her villainy, launching an attack. Amidst the chaos, Neve's engagement with the battle is ended instantly as she falls unconscious. In the desperate duel against Rackham and Rookwood, where spells clash with the titanic forces rarely seen in the rest of the wizarding world, Isidora defended herself with all her might. She's clearly more powerful than either man in this scene, taking on both of them with ease. However, the conflict ended abruptly. A crack of green energy. When Bakar, overcome with emotion over the injured Fitzgerald, intervenes by swiftly and mercilessly casting the killing curse upon Isidora. It's an oddly anticlimactic moment. A dark moment that could have informed the way the Keepers are viewed in the narrative, but there is never an opportunity to interrogate this action. Coming out of the memory, the player returns to the Keeper portraits. There they claim that they could not undo the power that Isidora had stored, so they kept it hidden below in the caverns under Hogwarts, awaiting a chosen one to do their bidding. I guess it's just good timing that you happen to start attending school the same year an evil goblin is attempting to breach the repositories for the first time in hundreds of years. Just a lucky coincidence, I guess. So the Keeper's grand master plan basically boils down to one gloriously anticlimactic move. Just keep the repository secret and do nothing. Their so-called good ending is nothing more than maintaining the status quo, leaving all that build-up of ancient magic, the Goblin rebellions and dark conspiracies completely unfulfilled. I mean, come on. Wrapping up the narrative by basically saying we did nothing, and that's that, is a surefire way to leave you feeling emptier than as if Isidora herself had just sucked out your soul. What was the point of all the intrigue if nothing truly transformative ever happens? Instead of delivering a satisfying, game-changing resolution, the Keeper's decision turns what could have been a powerful narrative moment into a missed opportunity. A bland, inert finale that just undermines all the weight the story worked so hard to try and build up. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, the player is, frustratingly, not able to question the Keepers on their actions. As I say, killing Isidora, rather than subduing her to have her arrested and questioned about how to dispel the magic that she's cast, and removing any remnant of her by destroying her portraits and burning down her home feels evil. In the Harry Potter universe, the Avada Kedavra is supposed to be the unforgivable curse, and San Bakar using it to stop Isidora is never considered or weighted as an action. As far as we know, he wasn't arrested and sent to Azkaban for its use. Lord Voldemort described the curse as having ripped his soul from his body. Elsewhere in the narrative, the game attempts to show that these are the bad guy actions through Seb's questline. There's just no consistency in how magic is portrayed across the game. So, okay, the player is forced to accept the Keeper's actions as justified because Isidora was just the bad guy doing bad things. No nuance, no room for questions, no room for an interesting moral conflict to play out. You are led back to the Ranrok storyline, and the last few quests within the main narrative, by being asked to craft a super special wand that can gain access to the repository to complete this main narrative. As figures like Ranrok and Victor Rookwood plot to harness the tumultuous powers Isidora once contained, the choice remains to the player. Will you mend the shattered repository of pain, or yield to the seductive allure of its raw, unfiltered energy? Well, we'll pick that thread up in Ranrok's section. Okay, so some pretty heavy stuff there. Isidora Morganat's storyline is, I think, meant to be a profound exploration of the interplay between pain and healing, a tragic narrative in which the desire to alleviate suffering paradoxically deepens it. The core idea is tantalizing, that pain and joy are two sides of the same coin, and by removing one, you inadvertently strip away the other. Isidora, gifted with the rare ability to harness ancient magic, believes she can cure emotional suffering. But in her relentless pursuit to eliminate pain from the world, she ends up leaving those around her, including her grieving father, emotionally hollow. For those of you who have watched my Star Wars Jedi retrospective, it should be no surprise that my favorite character in Star Wars is Anakin Skywalker. I'm a sucker for those Faustian tales, the road to hell being paved with good intentions, the tragedy of wanting to do good, and falling to the dark side anyway. Isidora's story should have worked for me. Her journey is steeped in irony. At Hogwarts, where teachers are expected to nurture and care for their students, Isidora's ambition drives her to push ethical boundaries. In her zeal to demonstrate the power of ancient magic, she experiments on her students. An act that not only undermines the sanctity of this teacher-student relationship, but also exposes the inherent danger in trying to eradicate pain wholesale. Healing is only possible when one confronts and embraces both pain and joy, a balance she tragically fails to grasp. When challenged by the Keepers, Isidora's response is to justify her actions as being for the greater good. This rationale rings hollow as it becomes increasingly apparent that her methods are both misguided and harmful. Her attempts to remove pain culminate in a catastrophic confrontation. After lashing out against those who oppose her, she ends up hurting Neve and is ultimately killed by those supposed to be guiding her. The narrative frames her death as the inevitable outcome of her overreach, a cautionary tale of hubris and the perils of tampering with the natural order of emotional experiences. Yet, this potentially rich exploration of a complex character is squandered by a one-sided presentation. The game offers only fleeting glimpses of Isidora's inner world, memories curated and filtered through the perspectives of the Keepers, who are more interested in condemning her than understanding her. As a result, players are denied the opportunity to interrogate her motivations or consider her perspective. Even if one finds themselves sympathizing with her noble, if flawed, intentions, the narrative confines her to a role as a tragic, cautionary bad guy figure, rather than a fully realized character who had compassion for others. This superficial treatment is symptomatic of a broader issue in Hogwarts Legacy, something I'm going to come back to in greater detail in the Sebastian section of this video. The roleplay elements, meant to immerse players in the wizarding world, feel stubby and underdeveloped. There are so many moments where these vestigial elements, these moments that were clearly meant to have more weight during development, dangle gracelessly from the carcass of this narrative. The single split in the road related to your Hogwarts house of choice, the good-evil choice at the end of the story, Sebastian's whole quest. It's pretty heartbreaking seeing these moments where a great game is trying to break free, only to be suppressed below the surface once again by the reality of releasing a game under the constraints of budgets and competing priorities. Moira Squire, the narrative lead, said, and I quote, "Harry Potter knew that the choices he made mattered. Our game not only allows the player to create an avatar that reflects their physical identity, it also, via the choices they make, allows them to express their personalities and particular points of view and affect the world around them." End quote. The choices presented, such as the option to embrace or reject Isidora's dark legacy, are rendered entirely cosmetic. In the final cutscene, a slight shift in the character's demeanor and the dreaded red-blue color shift hints at a deeper internal conflict, but the narrative quickly retreats into the familiar halls of Hogwarts, leaving any meaningful consequences of that choice unexplored. The game creates a jarring dissonance. Players are encouraged to invest emotionally in a storyline that promises depth and complexity, only to find that its critical themes remain unexamined, relegated to a series of nostalgic flashbacks and cursory cosmetic dialogue choices. In essence, Isidora Morganach's arc could have been a powerful meditation on the necessity of embracing pain as a path to genuine healing, something that the main series of books often dwells on. Instead, it falls into the trap of serving as a convenient plot device, a narrative shortcut to establish our player character as a chosen one, while sidestepping the opportunity for a nuanced exploration of its central themes. The tragedy of Isidora's story is left suspended, a tantalizing fragment of what might have been, which in turn undercuts my investment in the broader narrative of Hogwarts Legacy. At its core, Hogwarts Legacy introduces ancient magic as an age-old, mysterious and potent force, a power so rare and enigmatic that even Hogwarts professors scarcely understand it by the late 19th century. Within the game, this magic appears in shimmering traces or whispers, its hue varying with the nature of the spell, and is portrayed as a unique ability that only manifests in a select few, all of whom intriguingly begin their magical education in their 5th year. This late-blooming trait not only sets them apart from the ordinary, but also forges a narrative link between our player and legendary figures like Isidora and Rackham. Moira Squire, Portkey Games' narrative lead, explained the desire to incorporate this element so heavily in the narrative. Quote, "The books only touch on that type of magic, and it fascinated us that there may be more to it. If it's ancient, when did it start? What happened to it? Could one actually wield such magic?" We saw Grindelwald do some amazing things in the Fantastic Beasts films. Was his ability to control others drawing on ancient magic? All of these things informed our decision to go down that path in the game. Maintaining the authenticity of that world not only engages players, it keeps them engaged. While we have expanded the Wizarding world to allow for a wonderfully immersive game, we are well aware that if we stray too far from the rules of the world with which fans are familiar, we will lose their confidence in us, and the magic will be lost. We want fans to know that we hold the lore as dear as they do." End quote. Yet, when we juxtapose this intention and the chosen depiction with the established lore of the Harry Potter series, the picture becomes a little more muddled for me. The term ancient magic does, indeed, crop up in the books. For instance, when Lily Potter is said to have protected baby Harry from Voldemort's curse. However, the lore in the original series never required such latent, late-blooming abilities. Lily's power was inherent from the start. This creates a jarring disconnect for me. Hogwarts Legacy repurposes the term to suit its narrative needs, effectively carving out a separate canon where ancient magic serves as a plot device to endow the player with Chosen One status, and yet, in its visual language, the design of its creatures and castle, Legacy is utterly faithful to what has come before. Rather than exploring ancient magic as a complex and layered phenomenon, the game leans on it as a convenient mechanism to drive its story forward. It allows characters like Rackham to perform miraculous feats, summoning bountiful harvests for a drought-stricken hamlet, for example, and lets an older Isidora wield it to extract and store people's emotional pain. Meanwhile, the player's connection to this ancient force is used to nudge them towards the next objective, leaving ties to historic figures like Isidora and Rackham as interesting, yet ultimately unresolved narrative threads. In essence, what could have been a rich exploration of forgotten magic becomes little more than a catch-all tool to label the protagonist as special, without delivering on the promise of deep, meaningful lore. The gameplay application of ancient magic compounds the problem by generating a stark, ludonarrative dissonance. Imagine a 5th-year student, barely on the threshold of true wizarding maturity, obliterating enemies with explosive bursts of purple smoke, or summoning mighty forks of lightning with a casual flick of the wand. Such over-the-top displays of destructive power not only undermine the gradual, character-driven growth that defines the Harry Potter universe, but also clashes with the more nuanced portrayal of magic seen in the books. Young wizards are rarely, if ever, depicted as wielding such cataclysmic forces, making these moments feel both out of place and narratively unearned. Overall, Hogwarts Legacy's treatment of ancient magic comes off as a poorly integrated system. Rather than celebrating the subtle, everyday wonder of becoming a wizard, the game opts for grandiose, magical spectacle that clashes with the humble beginnings and gradual mastery inherent to the Harry Potter spirit. In doing so, it not only dilutes the established lore, but also leaves us questioning whether ancient magic, as presented, is truly an homage to the magical world we know, or simply a contrived means to drive an overblown plot. Ranrok's story begins with a claim steeped in ancestral pride. As a goblin who believed his very bloodline was owed the secrets of ancient magic, thanks to his ancestor Bragbor the Boastful, the original architect of Isidora Morganach's mystical repositories, Ranrok set out to unlock the arcane forces that had long been forgotten by the wizarding world. But the magic he would come to wield was no pure noble force. It was a tainted, corrupted strain of ancient power that he not only mastered, but distributed among his most loyal followers. In the turbulent decades of the 1880s, Ranrok emerged as a fearsome leader of his loyalists, igniting open conflict with the wizarding world. His first known act of defiance, a violent raid on the hamlet of Feldcroft, the one that left Sebastian's sister in the cursed state we will meet her in, was only the beginning of his long campaign. Hungry for more power, Ranrok delved into the hidden locations of the other repositories, begrudgingly forming an uneasy alliance with the Rookwood gang, using the journal of his, as we'll come to learn, ancestor, Bragbor, to guide these expeditions. This alliance was, of course, as volatile as it was strategic, as you should probably expect when a goblin supremacist and a wizard supremacist team up, I suppose. Their partnership was always underpinned by mutual distrust and clashing ambitions. But let's back up and recap the narrative beats to get a better view of the context surrounding Ranrok's tale of violent revolution. Ranrok's path of destruction intersected with that of a new, gifted fifth-year student at Hogwarts, a student fated to wield ancient magic. You, the player. In the crucial days leading up to the sorting ceremony of the 1890-1891 school year, Ranrok's machinations set off a series of violent encounters. Determined to secure the key to Vault 12 and the secrets it held, he dispatched a corrupted dragon to intercept our carriage. At Gringotts, he confronted the student and Professor Fig with a terrifying impatience, even slaying the goblin banker for what he deemed betrayal. Another clear nod to Voldemort and his own particular methods for dealing with disloyalty to the cause, and unleashing bursts of his twisted magic that incapacitated his foes, only for a vigilant sentinel to allow his adversaries a narrow escape. In a series of escalating miscalculations, Ranrok's schemes to abduct the student continued to unravel. With the reluctant aid of dark conspirators like Rookwood and Theophilus Harlow, he orchestrated distractions with corrupted trolls and plotted secret meetings in shadowed alleyways in Hogsmeade. Surely, there would be less conspicuous places to meet. But what do I know? Fast forwarding a little, the player meets a goblin named Lodgok, who's not exactly typical. Despite a long history of tension between goblins and wizards, Lodgok still believes in working together for a better future, even though goblins have always been treated as second-class citizens. The whole adventure kicks off when Lodgok gets involved in a mission to recover an ancient goblin-made helmet. This relic was originally stolen by a witch and placed in a wizard-only vault, a clear, big deal in the context of goblins and their ideology of ownership around goblin-made goods. After fighting through the vault, you learn that the helmet was snatched by Rookwood's Ashwinder gang, landing it in the middle of a dark wizard camp. Nothing's ever easy, is it? Well, no matter. Eleanor at this point is an expert at massacring dark wizards, so storming the camp to retrieve the helmet is little trouble. Lodgok's plan was simple. Hand the helmet over to Ranrok, hoping it would mend old wounds and earn favor, a way back into the Loyalists, to find out what they're planning. But Ranrok isn't so easily convinced. He suspects that Lodgok didn't pull off this feat all by himself, knowing the history of the relic and all. Feels like something we could have seen coming. Either way, Lodgok reveals a secret to the player. He reveals that Bragbor is Ranrok's ancestor. Bragbor's journals mention the hidden repositories built for Isidora, which Ranrok believes might hold some rare wizard magic capable of boosting goblin power. Later on, you get to team up with Amit, a young Ravenclaw who, I suspect, was meant to have a bigger role, but ended up with just one quest. While characters from Slytherin, Gryffindor and Hufflepuff enjoy extended friendships and storylines, Amit's only claim to fame is that he supposedly speaks gobbledygook, though he quickly shows he's not all that skilled at it. The adventure takes you into the mines south of Hogwarts, which serve as Ranrock's base of operations. Here, Lodgok has uncovered some shady business. You fight your way through hordes of Ranrock's loyalists, collecting blueprints, and eventually stumble upon his bizarre plan, building drills. I don't really like trying to find plot holes in stories, but Ranrok doesn't yet know where the final repository is. It's hidden in the caverns beneath Hogwarts, so his drill building seems like a strange coincidence. Have I missed something that could explain all this? Anyway, after the chaos in the mines, you reconnect with Lodgok outside. After some gentle probing, he shares a personal story about his first meeting with Miriam Fig, a moment when someone treated him as an equal and sparked a genuine friendship. Her tragic death shattered Lodgok's view of Ranrok, making him abandon his old loyalties. This heartfelt moment, brought to life by an outstanding voice performance, adds a powerful emotional layer to the story. I found myself oddly invested in Lodgok as a character, in those few scenes he's allowed to shine. Overall, the dynamic between Lodgok and Ranrok feels a little like the classic Xavier versus Magneto setup from X-Men. Two marginalized figures with very different ideas about whether to work with humans and wizards. But the story, as is never able to showcase these two characters enough to really bring out a compelling story. Later, you're once again deep in the mines. Always with the mines and caves. This time carving through goblins and trolls like it's second nature. You destroy Ranrock's drills along the way, but it's a futile effort for the most part. They'll all be rebuilt in time for the finale regardless of your actions here. Things hit a boiling point when you're confronted by Ranrok and Rookwood themselves in the mine. Lodgok has been caught, bringing the final journal of Bragbor straight to our villains, an artifact Ranrock's wanted for years. It seems like a theme throughout Harry Potter stories that everything would have been just a little bit better had the main cast chosen to do nothing at all. Lodgok, next time leave the journal somewhere safe, buddy. Don't bring it to the villain's lair. I guess Lodgok's hope was to keep it, and the location of the final repository, away from Ranrok, safe in the hands of the player. Either way, here, things take a dark turn when Ranrok reveals a shocking truth. Lodgok is his brother. Enraged by his brother siding with wizards, siding with those that have repressed goblin kind for centuries, Ranrok demands the journal and glimpses its contents. In a moment of raw betrayal, raw fury, and the first real shock for me throughout the story, Ranrok kills Lodgok, blasting him with a powerful spell. But the chaos doesn't stop there. Rookwood, in an unexpected turn, turns on Ranrok, trying to kill him with an Avada Kedavra, though his motives here remain unclear to me. The mine begins to collapse around you, and in the ensuing chaos you make your escape, barely outrunning the destruction. In the final chapter of the Ranrok storyline, things get pretty intense. Ranrok kicks off his invasion by drilling straight through the mountain that Hogwarts Castle sits on, taking advantage of the fact that the mountain isn't protected by the same magical defenses as the castle itself. He brings his loyal followers and a bunch of trolls along for the ride. Lucky us. Before the chaos unfolds, Eleazar Fig had quietly alerted the Hogwarts professors about the looming attack. Professors Matilda Weasley, Mudiwa Onai, Aesop Sharp, Abraham Ronan and Dina Hecat quickly joined forces with Fig and you, the player, to hold the line and defend the cavern. After slogging through waves of goblins and trolls, you and Fig make your way into the repository chamber itself. That's when Ranrok crashes the party. Using Miriam Fig's wand, he smashes open the final repository and literally inhales its raw emotions, transforming himself into a nearly invincible, dragon-like creature. In the ensuing battle, Ranrok crushes Eleazar Fig with falling debris before he can really make any sort of difference. In that titanic final clash, you manage to defeat Ranrok, but the story doesn't end there. You're faced with a big choice. Do you use the Keeper's Wand to trap the excess emotional magic and keep Isidora's legacy buried, following the Keeper's wishes? Or do you open the repository, consume the magic and wield that power yourself? Well, the twist is, your choice doesn't change how the finale plays out. I guess it's more about your personal take on the game's themes, as unsatisfying as that is to me personally. In the aftermath, as a memorial was held in Fig's honor, and the 5th-year student was hailed as a reluctant hero, Ranrock's dark legacy served as a grim reminder. When power is pursued at the expense of empathy and balance, it ultimately consumes its bearer and leaves only ruin in its wake. Alright, let's dig a little deeper and explore why I don't think this storyline works as well as it could have. Ranrock's rebellion, supposedly fueled by a long history of goblin oppression, could have been a rich, nuanced exploration of generational anger, racism, and colonial exploitation. Instead, what we get is a missed opportunity. Ranrok hails from a people whose heritage, inventions, and rightful ownership have been systematically pilfered by wizard kind. Imagine the goblins as the downtrodden, the underclass fighting back against centuries of cultural theft, a narrative echoing real-world struggles against colonialism and racism. Yet, rather than delving into this complex legacy, one where Ranrok is morally consistent in his desire to see the oppression of his people avenged, even when his methods are clearly violent, instead the game reduces Ranrok to a one-note, monologuing villain, more than happy to casually kill anyone who dares question him. He's painted as a militant leader whose only goal is to take back what is theirs, but his transformation into a monstrous dragon and his subsequent anticlimactic demise trivializes his cause. His loyalists, a ragtag group with a genuine grievance against wizard oppression, have the potential to embody the very real anger and bitterness felt by marginalized peoples. There's a place, I think, for a nuanced tale that examines the cycles of intergenerational hatred and violence. In that tale, Lodgok could emerge as an interesting counterpoint to Ranrock's anger. Instead, they all become mere fodder for an overblown fantasy spectacle. The fantasy storytelling of Legacy never goes beyond the gesture of oppression cosplay. The wider lore of this game sits within hints at a storied history. Goblin rebellions in the 17th and 18th century, the deep-seated resentment over being forbidden to wield wands, being exploited for their talents, and an ownership philosophy that is consistently undermined and disrespected by the wizarding community. Goblins run Gringotts. They control the wizarding economy, and yet are treated as second-class citizens. However, these rich thematic threads are left dangling, reduced to superficial exposition rather than being woven into the fabric of the narrative. Don't get me wrong, they were ignored in the original text of the Harry Potter novels too, but where Harry's story doesn't really involve itself in these political side stories, Legacy very much does, putting the goblins front and center. While the game briefly acknowledges the goblins' justified grievances against wizardkind, it never commits to exploring them. Ranrok's arc could have provided a powerful allegory for real-world issues, but instead it's left as a fleeting, over-engineered villain moment that never truly resonates. Hogwarts Legacy ultimately glosses over this potential, leaving us with a narrative that skims the surface of deep, socially relevant themes, only to collapse under its own lack of nuance. Fantasy as a genre has long held the powerful potential to act as a subtle mirror to our own world, exploring themes of slavery, racism, colonialism, heritage, and cultural trauma through allegory and metaphor. Think of Pratchett's Discworld series, or even the nuanced portrayals in works like N.K. Jemison's The Broken Earth series, where oppressed minorities and generational suffering are given a voice through mythic stand-ins. Even within video games, The Witcher 2 is a prime example of how these themes can be integrated into the narrative with nuance and gravitas. It delves into the moral complexities of power, cultural suppression, and the scars of past injustices, offering a rich narrative that resonates on a deeply human level. In attempting to explore the stories of the Scoia'tael and Iorveth in a nuanced and morally complex way, I'm getting off track. Maybe another time. In contrast, Hogwarts Legacy, despite its hints at a long history of goblin subjugation and cultural appropriation, fails to commit to these deeper themes. Ranrok, who could embody the justified generational anger of a people whose heritage has been stolen, is reduced to a one-dimensional villain. Instead of exploring the painful legacy of colonialism and systemic racism within the wizarding world, the narrative opts for broad, overblown villainy. Ranrok's cause, which had the potential to give voice to the goblins' legitimate grievances, instead comes off as shallow, an uninteresting afterthought in a story that could have been so much more. In this regard, Hogwarts Legacy misses the chance to transform a simple antagonist into a symbol of deeper cultural and historical trauma. A narrative opportunity that, if seized, might have elevated the game from mere spectacle to a thoughtful commentary on the costs of oppression. Okay, with the narrative groundwork set, let's break down two major issues I had throughout my time with Legacy that really jar with the established magic and tone of the Harry Potter universe. Hogwarts Legacy pushes us into a narrative where a fifth-year student, a newcomer to the wizarding world, suddenly finds themselves pitted against a threat of global proportions. Ranrok, this world-threatening figure that clearly aims to echo the menace of Voldemort, is introduced far too early in the story. In the Harry Potter books, we saw Voldemort's menace grow gradually over years, with Harry facing only fragments of his dark presence in his early years. The true confrontation is reserved for his final year. It's built up through whispered warnings, subtle hints, and a slow accumulation of dread. And even there, Harry struggles constantly. Yet here, the game forces a character who should still be in the midst of discovering the joys and challenges of magical education into epic battles against forces that seem more at home in a high fantasy blockbuster than a school of witchcraft and wizardry. There's a note in the making of and art of Hogwarts Legacy book that reads, quote, "Because of their relatively small size, it was difficult to make the goblins look menacing, and the team spent a long time trying to figure out armor and weapons that would have an edge to them, while still feeling not too fantasy. It's very easy to go all-out D&D in your design with spikes, skulls, and hard edges, but this is not what the wizarding world is about. There's a certain level of sophistication and historical accuracy we were shooting for. Add to the mix the element of ancient magic and you can see it was a battle, no pun intended." End quote. It's a real shame, but I think in the designs of the armor and weapons we have stumbled into generic fantasy. The armor and weapons wouldn't look out of place in anything ranging from Baldur's Gate through to Kingdoms of Amalur. The narrative feels unbalanced. It shoves us headlong into world-saving heroics before we've even had a chance to learn our first spells properly. For me, this premature escalation, this rush to get into large-scale conflict, shatters the sense of gradual growth and believability that made Hogwarts such a beloved setting in the first place. The other major issue that I think is exacerbated by the central Ranrok storyline is the combat. On the surface, the combat system in Hogwarts Legacy offers a flashy, dynamic experience. The juggling of spells on cooldowns, the Protego, parry system reminiscent of the Batman Arkham games, it's all designed to be fun and visually impressive. And for the opening few hours, it is. By hour 30, because it doesn't ever evolve beyond those opening hours, I did everything in my power to avoid combat. That might well be a very clever play on the part of the developers to subtly encourage a pacifist outlook on the part of our student. Ultimately, a closer look reveals some serious mismatches with the narrative's intent. For one, the enemies are simply too strong. Facing off against the legions of dark wizards and trolls takes an eternity to defeat because our health bars are inflated to absurd proportions. Instead of feeling like a challenging duel where skill and clever spell work matter, each encounter devolves into a drawn-out brawl where, once you've got your enemy in a magical juggle, the fight is essentially over, even if it takes forever to land that final blow. Nowhere is this more extreme than in that final fight with Ranrok. Here's the thing about the Ranrok dragon fight. It's a total mess. The boss has an outrageous amount of health, turning what should be an epic climax into a marathon slog. The fight's three-phase structure is so out of left field. It feels like they slapped together a trend-chasing boss battle, a poor imitation of something you'd expect in Dark Souls or Elden Ring. And that's not even the worst part. Design-wise, the Ranrok dragon is a complete mismatch with the rest of the game, and especially with the Harry Potter universe. Instead of an intricate, character-driven villain, we get a generic fantasy dragon spewing red smoke and chaotic storm energy in a bland, generic cavern. It's as if the developers couldn't bother to craft something that fit the lore, so they just dropped in a faceless, personalityless monstrosity. Ranrok Dragon. Even the name sounds more like a placeholder than a thoughtfully conceived character. And then there's the gameplay mechanics. The boss fight demands that you match the colors of your spells to these damaging, multicolored orbs in order to put Ranrok into a vulnerable state. It's an oddly tedious mechanic that feels like it was tacked on for extra challenge, rather than integrated into the narrative or the magic of the world. And to top it off, Ranrok dishes out absurd amounts of damage, making every misstep feel punishingly unforgiving, in a game that is otherwise not altogether interested in offering that kind of challenge. The Ranrok dragon fight is overblown, overly generic, and a poor imitation of high fantasy boss encounters seen elsewhere. Instead of providing a satisfying, lore-rich climax, it ends up being an impersonal, disjointed, and downright tedious experience that undermines the very magical cataclysm it's supposed to represent. As I sat thinking about this combat system for this video, I kept coming back to the same basic idea. Legacy's combat encounters are nothing more than filler. Generic, busy work designed solely to pad the game's runtime. You're constantly forced to pew-pew and explode your way through an endless parade of spiders, wolves, dark wizards, and goblins, watching a firework display that is fun for 15 minutes, but after 20 or 30 hours, I was begging to go home and crawl under the covers to get away from the flashes of green and red and purple. And after 40 hours, I was more hollow than the denizens of Lordran. It's like the game is saying, hey, you have this vast, empty, open world, so let's sprinkle in a load of combat encounters to make it seem busy. But really, these encounters are so rote and insubstantial that they end up feeling like a chore rather than an engaging part of the experience. Levioso, Descendo, Accio, Incendio, Depulso, Bombarda, rinse, repeat. Only occasionally will you need to break the monotony with a Dark Souls style roll or an Arkham style counter. Side quests in the open world are equally disappointing. Bland fetch quests that add almost no lore, character growth, or narrative weight. You're just running around collecting items to justify the existence of this massive map, but with little to no reward beyond more combat. Why yes, of course, stranger, I will head over to the bandit camp 200 yards away to collect your puffer skin for 50 coins, and you bet I'll haggle for more of a reward once I do return. Instead of rich, meaningful encounters that expand on the magic of Hogwarts, you get a string of shallow tasks that do nothing but slow you down. There are a couple exceptions to this, and I'll highlight them later in the video because I think they really show what could have been an exciting place to explore, if not for this mountain of generic filler content. More widely, the combat and quest design suffers because of an issue of scale and tone, wrapping back around to issue 1. A 5th year student still learning and growing in the ways of magic, suddenly unleashing devastating bursts of purple smoke or summoning down lightning bolts to obliterate entire camps of enemies just doesn't mesh with the world that we know. These moments, I guess intended to be cathartic or heroic, come off as wildly anachronistic. They rob the narrative of its stakes by suggesting that, despite being a fledgling witch or wizard, our hero can casually level entire battlefields with the same ease as a seasoned aura. A more fitting approach, for me at least, would have been to scale everything back. Instead of turning the conflict into an epic war against overwhelming forces, why not focus on the intimate, character-driven battles that define the Harry Potter experience? Imagine a system inspired by the Nemesis mechanics in Shadow of Mordor, where school bullies or rival students, real, relatable adversaries, could form lasting rivalries that evolve over the course of the game. Instead of generic dark wizards, the enemy encounters would be rooted in the day-to-day social dynamics of Hogwarts. This would, I think, keep the stakes personal, and the challenges would align perfectly with the journey of growing up in a magical school. In short, well, as short as I can manage anyway, Hogwarts Legacy suffers from an overblown narrative that forces a novice 5th year into epic, implausible battles, undermining the slow-burning tension that made Voldemort's threat so compelling in the original series. At the same time, the combat system, while flashy, is misaligned with the narrative. Its design, featuring unbalanced enemy health, a lack of true counterplay, and explosive displays of power, clashes with the humble, formative experience of learning magic at Hogwarts. For a game rooted in the magic of everyday school life, these mismatches leave us with a sense of dissonance that feels all too contrived. For me, a return to a more scaled-back, school-focused narrative, where the true battles are fought in classrooms, hallways, and through personal struggles, would have provided a richer, more authentic wizarding experience. By dialing down the epic scope and aligning combat mechanics with the journey of growing into one's magical abilities, Hogwarts Legacy could have honoured the subtle magic of its source material while still offering engaging gameplay. I think what makes Hogwarts Legacy so interesting and frustrating in equal measure is that it always feels like a mismatched blend of promising ideas that never quite coalesce. Always on the precipice of embracing a tone that works well, before it pivots awkwardly. It speaks to a confused development process, where ideas crashed on top of each other, priorities shifted constantly. On the one hand, the combat mechanics, the open world structure, and the Ranrok storyline's narrative beats seem tailor-made for an aura narrative, a gritty investigation into dark cults, flourishing in an open world. On the other, the game is framed around a naive student new to magic, whose journey should evoke the wonder and discovery intrinsic to Hogwarts. This disconnect leaves the player awkwardly caught between the thrilling, mature intrigue of an aura's case and the charming, formative experiences of a Hogwarts student. Each element could work brilliantly on its own, but as presented they clash, leaving us stranded in a narrative limbo. A uniquely captivating and popular questline among Hogwarts Legacy players is The Tale of Sebastian Sallow. If you selected Slytherin as your chosen house, as I did, Sebastian is likely one of the first students you interact with in the common room itself. Otherwise, you'll meet him within your introduction to Defense Against the Dark Arts class, where you're tasked with learning how to duel. This sets up the Crossed Wands Dueling Club, run by Lucan Brattleby, a young Gryffindor with a penchant for pitting his peers against each other. Here, you can partner with either Sebastian or Natside to complete the quest and defeat your classmates. It's a rather fun minigame, but ultimately serves only as a combat tutorial, since there are only 2 opportunities to play it after Professor Hecat sends you to meet Brattleby. Personally, I think this is a missed chance to install a multi-stage competitive challenge that could increase in difficulty as you progress, and be available during the course of the game's runtime. Instead, it sets the game up with expectations of there being interesting side missions that continue throughout your journey but just don't. Which ends up being disappointing in the mid to late game, when there's very little else to do. I think this is a part of a wider issue with the game's structure. It is so heavily front-loaded in terms of content. It sets an expectation that isn't really followed through once you start leaving the confines of the grounds of the castle. As I mentioned earlier, Hogwarts Legacy feels like a game that leaves much of its most promising ideas on the cutting room floor. The problem is, more so than any other game I've ever played, these vestigial elements have been poorly excised. We constantly bristle against what could have been. Nowhere is that more evident than in Sebastian's questline. He is a young wizard whose early life brimmed with promise. A boy born into an environment of curiosity, nurtured by scholarly parents and the tender care of his twin sister, Anne. This was Sebastian Sallow. At Hogwarts, his natural brilliance shone as he mastered spells and forged deep bonds with friends like Ominous Gaunt. In those early days, Sebastian's passion for learning and daring escapades in hidden corners of the castle painted the portrait of a hopeful, ambitious wizard destined for greatness. The perfect Slytherin. But tragedy, as we know, has a cruel way of twisting even the brightest of futures. Before Sebastian's 5th year, his idyllic world shattered when Anne was viciously attacked and cursed during a raid on their family home. A raid conducted by Ranrok's loyalists. The once bright hope of a shared future dimmed as Anne was condemned to suffer an unnamed curse. Desperate to save the sister he adored, Sebastian's heart began to darken. Every avenue of conventional magic and healing proved futile, and the shadows of forbidden lore beckoned with the promise of a miracle. Driven by love and desperation, Sebastian turned his gaze towards the dark arts, a realm that promised answers but exacted a terrible price. His once optimistic quest for knowledge slowly became an obsessive pursuit to cure Anne at any cost. In secret meetings with his trusted friend, the player character, Sebastian led daring forays into the restricted section, and even the hidden depths of Salazar Slytherin's scriptorium. With each illicit incantation and every forbidden tome he studied, the young duelist's methods grew increasingly unorthodox. He was willing, even eager, to use the Cruciatus Curse if it meant unlocking secrets that could bring healing to his suffering sister. In the hallowed halls of Hogwarts, Sebastian had already earned a reputation as one of the school's top duelists, an accomplished spellcaster and clearly a gifted student. But behind the camaraderie of the unsanctioned Crossed Wands Club lay a festering obsession. His noble intentions, the desire to restore Anne's lost health, began to contort into something darker. The more he delved into these arcane mysteries, the further he strayed from the values he was raised with. His experiments grew riskier, his alliances with dubious characters more desperate, until the dark magic he wielded seemed to consume him from within. His quest really kicks off when he convinces you to help him track down Salazar Slytherin's scriptorium. There, in an old spell book, Sebastian discovers clues about a catacomb where Slytherin's students once studied sarcophagi. Luckily, it's right outside his uncle's home in Feldcroft. According to a note, an unnamed student hid a relic behind enchantments woven around the catacomb's bones. a relic rumoured to have the power to reverse curses. Sebastian believed this relic might be the key to saving his sister, Anne. So your journey takes you deep into that catacomb, fighting the usual assortment of spiders and solving some basic puzzles involving the bones of some unnamed wizards. Things heat up quickly when you realize that Ominous has been following you, determined to stop anyone from taking the relic. After some tense moments, you manage to persuade Ominous to step aside so you and Sebastian can secure the relic. But the quest doesn't quite end there. When you return to Feldcroft, you find the hamlet under attack by Ranrok's loyalists. As is becoming customary for the game by now, there's no real reason Feldcroft is under attack. It's just about pushing drama without ever pausing to think about the question of why. In the ensuing chaos, Sebastian uses Imperio on a goblin that was about to attack Anne, forcing the goblin to take a knife to his own throat. A move that horrifies his Uncle Solomon, and it shocked me the first time I played the scene too. Harry Potter is often dark, but not like this. The tone is so much darker than anything I'd expect from this game. Furious at what he sees as a betrayal of the morals of their family, Solomon banishes Sebastian, forbidding him from ever seeing Anne again. Sebastian, however, won't give up. He convinces Anne that the relic holds the potential to lift her curse, but only at the cost of a dark sacrifice. Anne insists that Sebastian bring Ominous along before they can unlock the relic's full power at the catacomb. For Sebastian, curing Anne isn't just about reversing a curse. It's his desperate bid to earn redemption and return home. But matters spiral further out of control when you later find Sebastian back in the catacomb, surrounded by Inferi, zombie-like dark corpse puppets, animated through dark magic, the same creatures from the cave Harry and Dumbledore found Voldemort's locket Horcrux. With Anne off to seek help and Ominous busy talking to the headmaster, you fend off the Inferi alone to reach Sebastian. Pressing deeper into the darkness, you eventually find him. Only this time, he's surrounded by yet another group of Inferi. But there's something different. It looks like he's controlling them somehow, bending them to his will. You approach, intent on reasoning with him before things spiral further. Inside the catacomb, the connection between the relic and the Inferi becomes unmistakable. Just then, Solomon bursts in and shatters the relic in a fit of fury, setting off chaos all around. In the ensuing bedlam, and an incredibly busy boss fight with Solomon and Inferi coming at you, things turn darker still. Sebastian, overcome with anger, unleashes Avada Kedavra and kills his own uncle in a single flash of green light. Moments later, Anne appears, swiftly clearing the remaining Inferi and disapparates with Solomon's body. Devastation and regret etch across Sebastian's face, and you know you have to follow him. Exiting the catacombs, Sebastian is clearly unhinged, a far cry from the ambitious Slytherin you once knew. With everything that's happened, you realize that a heart-to-heart conversation with him is not only necessary, but also the only way to understand the dark path he's been forced down. Or, for my dark side playthrough with Eleanor, encouraging those dark impulses, and finally learning Avada Kedavra myself. After the chaos of the main plot wraps up, you get the opportunity to sit down with Sebastian, or Ominous if you've turned Sebastian over to the authorities, to talk about everything that's happened, the dark magic he's unleashed, the weight of taking his uncle's life, and the pain of losing Anne's trust. It's clear that Sebastian did all that he did out of desperate desire to save his sister. The path to hell is paved in good intentions, and Sebastian Sallo's journey is a somber tale of a brilliant young wizard whose noble intentions, twisted by the lure of forbidden power, led him down a path of irrevocable darkness. At least, that's what I think the intention behind Sebastian's arc is meant to be. In theory, his tragic descent, where noble intentions to save his twin sister devolve into an obsession with the dark arts, should have been one of the most emotionally engaging storylines in Hogwarts Legacy. It probably is the most emotionally engaging storyline in the game, though I'm not sure that's a compliment in the end. I love stories that delve into tragedy, where good intentions are corrupted by desperation. But Sebastian's narrative is where the promise of meaningful player choice is most glaringly undermined. Consider the setup. Moments in which the player is presented with the possibility of influencing Sebastian's fate. We're given the impression that we might steer him back from the brink, or, conversely, push him deeper into his dark pursuits. These are the kinds of moral crossroads that could have injected real emotional weight into his journey. Choices where siding with Sebastian, or aligning with figures like Humorous or Solomon, should have had far-reaching consequences for his character development. And yet, these moments of potential agency vanish into thin air. You can betray Ominous one moment, and the next he's asking you to help talk Sebastian down from his dark plans. Ominous say, "I hate to break it to you, but I'm the one pushing Sebastian at this point, as you just heard from all your eavesdroppings." Not that my encouragement or lack thereof does anything to alter the narrative at all. It's as if the narrative is constantly reinforcing, sure, make a choice if you feel like it, but no matter what, the story is going to unfold the same way. That apathy to the player's engagement is such a strange choice. As a result, my involvement feels not so much as guiding his tragic fall, but rather like I'm being nudged along a predetermined path. I can't shake the feeling that my input is reduced to a mere aesthetic garnish. A few minor dialogue variations that change the tone momentarily, but never alter the overall outcome. Like throwing a stone into a river, I can make a momentary splash, but I can't alter the flow of water. This issue becomes even more frustrating in light of developer interviews, where they promise a game rich with meaningful choice. Let's revisit that quote from earlier, from Moira Squire, the narrative lead. Quote, "Harry Potter knew that the choices he made mattered. Our game not only allows the player to create an avatar that reflects their physical identity, it also, via the choices they make, allows them to express their personalities and particular points of view and affect the world around them." End quote. The making of book is replete with claims about empowering players to shape the narrative, yet in Sebastian's case that potential is left completely untapped. The choices feel haphazardly tacked on, as if they were added at the last minute without fully integrating into the fabric of his story. Or perhaps the ambition was to have a multi-branching narrative that provides moments to shape the outcome of Sebastian's quest, and it could never be wrestled into life before the reality of deadlines made their mark. Either way, what was, I'm sure, meant to be a bold, player-driven narrative ends up as an ugly, malformed abomination. A stark reminder that even the best ideas can fall victim to the harsh realities of game development. It's a real shame, because if done right, this kind of choice-based storytelling could have elevated the entire experience into something truly magical. What should have been an exploration of the delicate balance between salvation and damnation instead feels like a missed opportunity. Rather than allowing us to truly wrestle with the moral ambiguity of Sebastian's descent into darkness, the game forces his tragic trajectory down a single, immutable path. In doing so, it undermines the narrative stakes and dilutes the emotional impact that his story could have had on us as players. Ultimately, Sebastian's arc stands as one of the most poignant examples of how Hogwarts Legacy falls short of delivering on its promise of meaningful player choice. It's a story that hints at complexity and consequence, but resolves into a series of superficial decisions, leaving us to wonder what might have been if our choices truly mattered. One particularly tantalizing glimpse of potential is found in the one branching quest element that changes based on your chosen house. In this quest, the path branches in different directions. My Slytherin, Eleanor, was tasked with helping the always horrible-looking house elf Scrope locate his late mistress's ancestral ring. In reality, the quest boiled down to little more than finding a couple scraps of paper, swimming to a nearby cave with a piece of toast, and feeding an enchanted squid mural. It's as weird as it sounds. Hufflepuff leads you to a grim detour to Azkaban, Gryffindor sets you on the path of the Headless Hunt, and Ravenclaw sends you up to the Owl Raid. Ultimately, it's 4 different ways of getting to a quest with the ghost called Richard Jackdaw. The branching paths inevitably reconverge. But when I first played Hogwarts Legacy, I was playing in parallel with my partner, a Ravenclaw, and we were both incredibly excited seeing the story diverge, assuming we'd see this feature occur later down the road. But it didn't happen again. This isolated instance shows just how interesting and replayable the game could be if these meaningful variations were extended throughout the narrative. Selecting a specific house should have a profound impact on both gameplay and role-playing, but as it stands, aside from that one quest, the game offers nothing more than an illusion of choice. This was a major selling point in the pre-release marketing, promising that your house would truly matter to your gameplay experience. Instead, that promise evaporates, leaving me disappointed by the missed opportunity to truly tailor the narrative to a chosen identity. For a moment, I want to look at the wider RPG issues in the game, and for me, these surround the combat applications of the Unforgivable curses. Narratively, Sebastian's questline is trying to show us that dark relics and dark magic are corruptive, presumably to support Isidora's storyline. So, it doesn't then follow that he's able to teach you all 3 Unforgivable curses, Imperio, Crucio, and the infamous Avada Kedavra. It's almost as though the writers didn't have a more natural way for you to learn them, if a darker playthrough is what you're aiming for. For example, wouldn't it make more sense to seek them out alone, maybe from the restricted section in the library or somewhere even harder to access outside the school? It begs the question of how Sebastian knows the spells in the first place, as a fellow 5th year, to be able to teach you them at all. There's no light side or dark side dialogue branch like you'd see in something like Mass Effect to build up your allegiance to either side. Nor are there companions who are able to comment on your actions. Whilst Fig, Natty, Poppy and others can be present when you cast that fateful green spell, they carry on with their digital lives as if nothing has happened. Not entirely traumatized that they've just seen you murder someone in cold blood. It's incongruous with the world you're playing in and the character that you're playing as. You really have to convince yourself, because the game does very little to support the roleplay here, that your character is a dark witch or wizard if you choose to use one of the 3 Unforgivables. Based on the lore of the world of Harry Potter, any singular use of Imperio, Crucio or Avada Kedavra will, in the words of Mad-Eye Moody / Barty Crouch Jr., land you a one-way trip to Azkaban. And yet, nobody bats an eye, and there's no sort of soul reparation to be made from the player's perspective. You can go around mass-killing enemies left, right, and center, and nothing comes of it, leaving you with a broken sense of immersion. Or at least, it did for me. It undermines the world they've worked so hard to create. The only thing stopping you from accessing the spells is your own headcanon and roleplay for your character to answer "no thanks, I'm not interested in criminal behavior" when Sebastian asks if you want to learn them. You have to lock yourself out of them because there is no morality or character alignment system in this game that might sway you either way. The RPG mechanics in the game just aren't sophisticated enough to provide consequences to the player character after using dark magic, and they're introduced to you during a quest that you can't skip either. Say that you wanted to remain a proportionally naive, do-gooding student and are focused on staying away from dark magic. There isn't really an option to disengage with Sebastian's questline or verbalize your distaste in his methods, in any meaningful way at least. Even ominous as protestations don't provide you with an exit route out of there, meaning that this quote from Moira Squire, the narrative lead, is strictly untrue. Quote, "It isn't necessary to complete every relationship mission, and the player may choose not to complete any of them. However, they do impact the player's gameplay journey in the way they further the relationship with the companion they chose." End quote. On a more practical level, the player is incentivized to accept the spells into their arsenal because they pose such a great advantage within the combat system. There are many enemy types within the game, such as trolls who are immune to the more basic spells but have huge health bars. Instead of pinging basic cast at them 1,000 times, it's much easier to chain curse enemies and then cast Avada Kedavra to end them all instantly and simultaneously. This strategy is encouraged within the skill tree too, where you unlock this ability and more to aid in your serial killer tendencies. I think the inclusion of these spells is a fun addition, but the experience would have been elevated if there were stakes involved with using them, which, unfortunately, is never delivered. In contrast to all the darkness that we've explored together, Poppy's story is a delightful small-scale tale, reminiscent of a classic Hogwarts adventure, one that brims with the warmth, whimsy, and genuine heart that I've always loved about the wizarding world. As a proud Hufflepuff in her 5th year during the 1890-1891 school year, Poppy isn't out to change the world with grand, catastrophic magic. Instead, her journey is defined by small-scale heroics, the bonds of friendship and the courage to stand up for what's right, even in the face of mischief and danger. It all begins when Poppy finds herself facing down a couple of bullying classmates who are tormenting Persephone, a gentle Kneazle. It's in this moment of quiet bravery that she meets the new student, a kindred spirit who quickly becomes her friend. With that initial spark of camaraderie, Poppy introduces us to her secret companion, Highwing, a magical hippogriff who soars as a symbol of the untamed wonder of the wizarding world. But Poppy's heart beats not just for magical creatures, but also for justice. Troubled by the whispers of poachers lurking around Hogwarts and Hogsmeade, she embarks on her own investigation. Her keen ears pick up snippets of talk about a mysterious place known as Horntail Hall, a location that, upon exploration with the player, reveals itself to be a dragon fighting pit. I've got to admit, I'm a real sucker for that TARDIS style of it's bigger on the inside. There, they uncover the cruel truth. Poachers linked to Ranrok's loyalists have captured a magnificent, female, Hebridean black dragon and stolen her egg. Well, as a Welshman, I obviously can't stand idly by while a dragon suffers. So, Poppy and Eleanor will confront the poachers, obviously with lethal intent because, well, you just don't mess with dragons. In a flurry of spells and daring maneuvers, you both confront the poachers, liberate the chained dragon, and set her free, an act that is both thrilling and deeply humane. Later, over a cup of butterbeer at the Three Broomsticks, Poppy reveals her worry that the freed dragon might be consumed by despair without its lost egg. This concern propels the two of them on a new quest into the rugged mountains where the dragon has returned to her nest. There, amid the crisp mountain air and a perilously close encounter with fire-breathing fury, you and Poppy bravely manage to restore the egg to its rightful home. Relief is palpable when the dragon, though initially threatening, simply gathers her egg and soars away. A silent thank you etched in the skies. Yet Poppy's protective streak for fantastic beasts doesn't stop at dragons. Upon returning to Hogsmeade, she grows anxious about her grandmother's safety, suspecting that the poacher's cruelty might strike closer to home. Their investigation uncovers clues hinting at the existence of golden snidgets, a species thought to be extinct. As a quick aside, the story of why the golden snidgets are extinct is one of the most darkly hilarious stories in the Harry Potter world. Anyway, not wanting to get too sidetracked, refusing to let greed and malice snuff out these magical wonders, Poppy devises a plan to protect them. Despite knowing that meeting the enigmatic centaurs in the Forbidden Forest is no small feat, and that they might possibly be incredibly hostile to wizards, she and the player venture into the depths of the forest. After a tense standoff with a centaur herd led by the formidable Alec, and a timely rescue by the kindly Doran, they are guided to the enchanting Moonstone Garden. There, amid the soft glow of the eponymous rocks and the mesmerizing dance of moon calves, Poppy opens up about her past and her family. adding a layer of heartfelt vulnerability to her otherwise steadfast spirit. Raised in the midst of poacher camps, her parents were actual poachers, Poppy quickly decided that beasts were worth far more than the greedy, heartless humans hunting them. Even as a kid, she didn't quite fit in with the whole steal and kill mentality her parents embraced. By the time she was 10, her conscience was louder than the clamour of the camp, and she made the gutsy decision to bolt for her grandmother's place, a sanctuary that had been calling her name for years. The tipping point came one fateful night when Poppy overheard the poachers planning to kill a captured hippogriff just for profit. That was it. She couldn't stand by any longer. With the instinct of a true rebel, she rescued the hippogriff, by wing, and they escaped together. As someone who often feels more comfortable in the presence of animals, more so than other people anyway, I think Poppy's story is one that resonated more than it might otherwise have for me. Either way, Poppy and Eleanor set out for the Gilded Perch, the last known refuge of the Golden Snidgets. Even though poachers ambushed them, of course, in a desperate bid to seize these rare creatures, the arrival of Centaur allies tips the scales in our favour. In the ensuing scuffle, Poppy witnesses a magical miracle. 3 Snidget eggs begin to hatch, their fragile promise of new life a testament to hope and renewal. Though she frets for their future, Doran's reassuring words remind her that the centaurs will keep them safe. By the time Poppy and Eleanor return to Hogwarts, they carry the glow of small victories. Moments of heroism, friendship, and a deep-rooted belief that protecting the natural, magical world is a noble cause. Grateful for the companionship that guided her through the danger of the poachers, and having found some level of closure toward her parents, she resolves to open her heart further and make more friends. It's a saccharine, sweet, and simple narrative, but it worked for me. This is the storytelling ambition that I was looking for throughout Hogwarts Legacy. This is the only storyline I can say I uncritically adored. In contrast to the grand world-threatening arcs and high-stakes duels of the other storylines, Poppy's journey is refreshingly intimate. It's an adventure that embraces the true essence of the Harry Potter universe, the power of friendship, the thrill of discovery, and the quiet courage found in standing up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. In a game that often juggles epic narratives of dark ambition and world-shattering battles, Poppy's questline emerges as a much-needed breath of fresh air. While the overarching narrative often forces our inherently kind and unassuming player character into exaggerated displays of villainy or heroic feats that feel both out of place and cartoonish, Poppy's tale stands out for its heartwarming displays of teenage righteousness. Poppy's adventure, with its charming escapades against lowly poachers, encounters with mischievous magical creatures, and a rescue mission that feels reminiscent of those early, whimsical adventures in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, sneaking Norbit through the castle at night, offers an experience that is perfectly scaled to a courageous Hogwarts student. Here, the player character isn't thrust into the role of a reluctant savior, battling armies or confronting a Dark Lord. Instead, they're involved in a narrative that celebrates the beauty of loyalty, friendship, and bravery on a human scale. This is a questline where being a kind, friendly, and sometimes even just a normal character actually fits perfectly. Contrast this with the darker questlines we've already covered, those involving Sebastian's tragic plunge into the dark arts, or Ranrok's colossal battles against wizardkind. In these story arcs, the narrative ambition is so overblown that our somewhat innocent and nice player character is pushed to adopt roles that clash with the persona built up throughout the game. One moment you're nudging Sebastian further down his path of dark ambition, and the next, the narrative conveniently resets, ensuring that you remain the ever-friendly, well-meaning student who accepts zero consequences for the dark acts you've committed. The intended weight of choice evaporates into a series of minor dialogue tweaks that hardly alter the trajectory of the larger story, let alone altering the view of our character in the eyes of those around them, leaving us with a character who bounces from a cartoonishly cruel or mercenary version of themselves right back to their familiar, friendly self, as though nothing has happened. One minute I'm casting the Unforgivable curse, #1 of Avada Kedavra, with Fig in view, The next, I'm gently encouraging Poppy to help save the Mooncalves and Golden Snidgets. As we've already explored, the potential for these stories to offer genuine exploration of moral ambiguity and personal growth is undercut constantly by a design that funnels the player toward a fixed, unchanging outcome. One that should have too high an impact on the wider wizarding world to feel truly immersive. Constantly, I'm asking myself, am I really doing this? As I strike down hundreds upon thousands of beasts, goblins and dark wizards during these quest lines. Which is never not odd, considering you didn't know how to perform magic only 5 in-game hours earlier. So what do we have here? Well, Hogwarts Legacy's narrative is a study in contrast. While its darker quest lines suffer from exaggerated storytelling and a dissonance between character and action, Poppy's adventure provides a grounding counterpoint. A magical romp that honors the whimsical, intimate magic that made Harry's adventures so compelling. It's a tale where the stakes are appropriate, the character's virtues shine through, and the player feels like an integral part of a classic, enchanting school story. In the end, Poppy's narrative not only highlights what works so well in the Harry Potter universe, but also exposes the missed opportunities in the game's more ambitious, yet ultimately hollow, darker arcs. I think one of the most glaring issues with Hogwarts Legacy is its pacing. The quest log wildly oscillates between tones in a way that is both unsatisfying and disorienting. One minute you are helping a student chase their enchanted flying diary pages through the library. The next you're plunging into the dark depths of the scriptorium, contemplating the use of the Cruciatus Curse. A stark, ominous detour that forces you to question your character's identity. Deke thinks we should be proud of all the potions we've brewed this year, as we return to the Room of Requirement covered in the ashen remains of the 20 dark wizards who dared try to stop us from looting yet another chest for a green-ranked scarf. Instead of allowing you to settle into the role of a wholesome, do-gooding student, if that's the path you're aiming for, the game's inconsistent pacing makes it difficult to define who your character really is. Despite attempts through dialogue to offer moments of character definition, these choices feel superficial. You might nudge your character toward nastiness or a more mercenary stance, but the narrative structure invariably, inevitably, pulls you back toward a generic, lawful good alignment by quest end. For me, the dissonance in pacing renders the player character incredibly bland. Instead of feeling like a unique individual with distinct beliefs and moral complexity, you're left with a character whose actions are dictated by a script that never truly allows for meaningful narrative divergence. This undermines the role-playing experience and leaves players wondering, who am I supposed to be in this constantly shifting narrative? What I would have loved to see in Hogwarts Legacy is a quest structure that truly embraces the unique magic of the Harry Potter universe. A structure that puts relationships, rivalries, and the everyday life of a Hogwarts student at its core, rather than defaulting to world-saving plots. Imagine a game that leans more into the school vibe, where every corridor of Hogwarts isn't just a backdrop for epic battles, but a living space where friendships are forged, rivalries simmer, and your decisions genuinely shape your character's journey. Take a look at some of the greats in the RPG genre, and we can see a clearer idea of what could, and for me should, have been. Let's take inspiration from games like KOTOR, Mass Effect, or Fire Emblem, where character quests and companion relationships are as integral to the experience as the main narrative. In Mass Effect, as the example, every interaction, dialogue choice, and even which quests you choose to complete carries some kind of weight to the overall narrative. Dialogue choices and side quests not only reveal the intricate lore of that world and breathe life into the Citadel and the various planets you explore, but also influence your moral alignment, your standing with Shepard's companions. It's common these days to critique the relatively black and white, or I guess red and blue, Paragon system as overly simplistic, lacking in nuance, and of having the unintended effect of railroading you into certain choices. I don't know that I disagree fully with this critique either, but having some kind of grounding and consequence to your playstyle should, be part of the key foundations of a Harry Potter game, in my opinion at least. Transposing a moral alignment system to Hogwarts Legacy could dictate which spells you have access to. For example, only characters who embrace a darker, morally ambiguous path could learn and cast the Unforgivable curses. In my ideal version of Legacy, you wouldn't be navigating battles against shadowy cults or world-ending threats. I want to see what is unique about this world, this IP. I want to explore the complexities of everyday school life, attending classes, clashing with rivals in the hallways, and building alliances with classmates who would become your closest friends or bitter foes by the end. Such a focus would tap into the heart of what makes Harry Potter so beloved, offering a unique gameplay experience that is both intimate and deeply personal, rather than the one-size-fits-all grand-scale heroics that we have. One of the standout achievements of Hogwarts Legacy is its masterful art and design, which brings Hogwarts and Hogsmeade to life in a way that both honours and expands upon the rich legacy of the wizarding world. In an interview with Screen Rant, the lead designer Alan Tew said, quote, "We know that there's going to be a bunch of things that are just like, you want it to be familiar enough, right? It's like, okay, this is like the thing that I saw in the films. I recognize this tower, that tower, recognize this common room. So we want recognition, but we also want it to be really fun to play. And it seems like a lot of times what would reconcile those arguments were the books, because the written descriptions would give us a little bit of wiggle room where we could wind up being more authentic by following the books, or achieve a gameplay goal. We hope, ultimately though, that even the experience of Harry where he comes in, he doesn't know the castle, he doesn't know exactly how it works, and you're kind of seeing it with fresh eyes for the first time too. I think we're hoping that through all of these transactions, by solving all these things, we wind up with enough differences that you're having that same experience where it all feels fresh. You don't quite know exactly where it all is, but you know you're in an authentic place and the right spot." End quote. The art team has crafted a Hogwarts castle that expertly walks the fine line between faithful homage and inventive reimagination. The castle resonates with that authenticity. There's so many little nods to the films and the books, yet it possesses its own distinct identity that feels fresh and original. Every corridor and chamber is imbued with atmosphere. As you race through the corridors, you might catch a glimpse of students setting off sparkling fireworks or witness two animated suits of armor clashing in a spontaneous duel. These otherworldly moments, like ghosts drifting through walls and engaging in quiet conversation, elevate the castle from a mere backdrop to a dynamic, living environment. I've genuinely run out of superlatives to praise the design of the castle and the joy of inhabiting Hogwarts, so I'll just say this. The meticulous attention to detail throughout the castle is nothing short of breathtaking. A casual turn around a dimly lit corner near the dungeons might lead you to a ghost death day party, a scene that directly harkens back to the Philosopher's Stone book, while the sudden appearance of a giant squid from the Black Lake adds an unexpected burst of magic and mystery as you fly on your broom. It reminds us that both Harry Potter and the player's stories are just drops in the ocean of the history of this castle and this world. Such details, both big and small, infuse the halls of the castle with texture and life, making every exploration feel rewarding and filled with discovery. Adding another layer of depth, the castle is peppered with hidden puzzles and secret rooms, whether it's deciphering the enigmatic challenge on the stone bridge that connects two parts of the castle, or unraveling mysteries in the clock tower. These thoughtfully integrated puzzles invite players to slow down and engage with their surroundings. Each hidden nook not only tests your wits, but also reinforces that sense of wonder that comes from exploring a place as storied and magical as Hogwarts. The charm isn't confined to the castle alone, though. Hogsmeade too dazzles with its high level of art design and animation polish. The village is rendered with such care that every detail, from the bustling market stalls to the gentle hum of magical activity, contributes to an immersive experience. The design choices throughout Hogsmeade ensure that the entire game world feels cohesive, alive, and wonderfully inviting. The side quest, Spot Removal, is a perfect example of the kind of deep-cut lore that helps flesh out the world and keeps it feeling true to the wider Harry Potter universe. It is ultimately a fetch quest into the Forbidden Forest for Bubo-tubers, and a fight with a troll, but the quest giver, Sakurisa Tugwood, appeared in the older games as a chocolate frog card character, famous for her beauty potions later in life. It's a fun nod, and speaks to the passion the devs have for obscure references. Hogwarts Legacy's mechanical and artistic achievements lie in its ability to create a world that feels both familiar, yet still refreshingly new. By striking that perfect balance between authenticity and innovation, the game transforms its environments into memorable, interactive experiences. The castle and Hogsmeade aren't just set dressing for your adventures. They're integral characters in their own right, full of charm, mystery, and endless opportunities for discovery. This level of detail and care, I think, elevates the game, ensuring that every moment spent within its world is both enchanting and unforgettable. Having said that, while Hogwarts Legacy's castle is a visual treat, bursting with those meticulous details that really speaks to the passion of the team that worked on the game, it's missing that authentic school vibe that should make you feel like you're really living at Hogwarts. Instead of embracing the everyday chaos of school life, the game sanitizes it. There's no real day or night cycle with consequences, no awkward rush to get to the dormitory before curfew, or nerve-wracking moments when you're nearly caught sneaking out after dark. Forbidden corridors that could land you in detention, gone. And classes? They're just background fluff, the occasional cutscene rather than the core of your daily routine, and they're mostly over at only 5 hours in. Just look at a game like Bully, a Rockstar game that I'm sure most have forgotten, for a better idea of how to make a compelling gameplay loop out of a school. Reading the making-of notes of some of the senior artists, it feels like at one point we may have been a lot closer to that reality of a student simulator. Quote, "Every exterior window had an interior counterpart. We even had secret rooms that the player would only be able to find if the outside windows were counted and compared to the inside windows. They'd notice that there was an extra window near one of the common rooms. Whereas back doors and alternative paths were once designed for stealth gameplay, the overall layout became much more linear and intuitive. We are very pleased that these necessary steps were able to allow the player to feel less like a first year, and it won't take too long for players to feel savvy in their knowledge of the castle." End quote. The potential for a genuine student simulator, a game where your decisions in class, your interactions in secret passageways, and your everyday mischief all add up to a uniquely personal Hogwarts experience, is sadly never fully realized. The school point system, which was so intrinsic to the source material, is never properly actualized, and the player's house simply automatically wins at the end of the year without there being any real sense of competition. Occasionally, we get a meaningless nod, points to Slytherin, but it's also intangible. The castle is a masterpiece in design, but it's missing that messy, unpredictable charm of true school life that makes the Harry Potter world so endearing.
Here, in the untamed wilds of the Scottish Highlands that embrace Hogwarts, behold the majestic moon calves, creatures of gentle grace, wandering freely under the soft glow of the moon. Their natural habitat is a serene haven, a place where every graceful step sings the song of wild, unbridled freedom. The moon calf is a carefree creature, found here roaming in harmonious packs, utterly absorbed in the simple pleasures of life. They graze, they frolic, they even share an occasional low, melodic moo with their kin, blissfully unaware of the deadly hunters stalking their pack. What's that rustling in the underbrush? Ah, it's the rare 5th year ancient magic-consumed witch, a natural hunter of the meek mooncalf, armed with nothing but misguided heroism, a deadly Leviosa charm, a bottomless knapsack, and a noble mission: to save these adorable beasts from the clutches of elusive, conveniently absent poachers. Accompanying the deadly hunter, the dastardly Deke, a house elf whose true talent seems to lie in curating magical animal collections, rather than preserving natural habitats. In a blast of levitation magic and this mysterious bag, these delightful creatures are snatched from their pastoral idyll and herded into the confines of the Room of Requirement. And so, as the Mooncalves' carefree existence comes to a sudden halt, our duo of predatory hunters marches on, blissfully unaware of the irony inherent in their actions. In their desperate bid to rescue these creatures, they're not saving them at all. They're turning them into nothing more than prized collectibles. Now far from the open meadows they once roamed, the Mooncalves find themselves thrust into an unnatural breeding program. Deke, in his zealous pursuit of conservation, corrals these noble beings into an environment far from their own. A living terrarium that strips away the very essence of their wild nature. And so, the tragic comedy unfolds. Creatures meant to embody freedom are forced to live out their days as cogs in a magical, over-engineered breeding scheme. What was once a display of nature's pure wonder becomes satirical spectacle. The truly vile and reprehensible Deke has won. Our character, a witless puppet in a sick game of endless, unquenchable lust for collection.
While Hogwarts Legacy dazzles with its meticulously crafted castle and stunning art direction, its open-world design leaves much to be desired. A glaring contrast that ultimately disrupts the overall player experience. The Scottish Highlands in the game are, as with the castle, a visual masterpiece. The sprawling, rolling hills, the deep, mysterious Black Lake, and even the awe-inspiring sight of a black dragon swooping down to snatch a sheep. All of these elements contribute to an environment that feels like it's ever-changing. The seasonal transitions, from the golden glow of autumn to the glistening snows of winter and the vibrant greens of spring, breathe an undeniable beauty into the landscape. Yet, as breathtaking as these vistas are, they serve primarily as a feast for the eyes. Once you leave the hallowed halls of Hogwarts, you quickly discover that the open world is riddled with the common pitfalls of the genre. A map that's far too large and frustratingly empty, filled with sprawling stretches of tedium rather than meaningful, engaging content. The open world areas feel like a textbook example of design bloat. Instead of being filled with diverse and captivating activities, the game opts for a series of repetitive, shallow distractions. Whether it's the monotonous Merlin trials, the overly simplistic balloon popping, or even the baffling star-watching events and bare-bones landing platform challenges, these side activities hardly add substance to the gameplay. In many ways, these tasks serve as filler, breaking the immersion rather than deepening it, and ultimately detract from the rich narrative promise established by the castle's enchanting corridors. In fact, let's focus in on the Merlin trials because I think they highlight so much about what is wrong with the design of the side content in Hogwarts Legacy. Alright, so Merlin trials. A side activity that's supposed to test your spellcasting chops, tickle your puzzle-solving itch, and reward you with extra inventory slots. An absolute essential considering how few inventory slots you actually have, and how much stuff you pick up throughout your adventure. In theory, these trials are a neat nod to magical lore, a series of spell-based challenges scattered throughout the Scottish Highlands, each one a little test of skill. Sounds charming enough, right? Let's quickly go over how it's set up. Shortly after you meet Natty near Lower You hear a commotion coming from Nora Blackwell's tent. Nora, a researcher who's dedicated her life to studying Merlin's mysterious shrines, is currently under siege by a couple of generic, nameless dark wizard goons. They're interrogating her about, well, you. Apparently, in the twisted logic of Hogwarts Legacy, Nora is the go-to source for tracking a random 5th year student. I mean, why would she know anything about your comings and goings? It's a mystery as baffling to me as Merlin's own architectural ambitions. So, naturally, you step in and save the day. With a flick of your wand and a dash of spellcasting ease, you dispatch these bumbling bad guys like they're nothing more than speed bumps on your path to glory. After this little distraction, you're offered some Mallowsweet and resolve a simple light the torch puzzle. This is, of course, Merlin's life work that has taken Nora her own lifetime of research to understand. A 15-year-old has turned up and, within a minute, has solved your life's work. And it amounts to this? These trials are everywhere. It's like the Highlands have been overrun with magical checkpoints, so much so that you can hardly take a few steps without stumbling upon one. Instead of being a rare treat, they're shoved in at every turn, seemingly designed not so much to celebrate your mastery of magic as to pad the game's runtime with a constant grind for extra inventory space. Merlin was clearly very busy building these, I guess, shrines? A little gazebo for a Sunday afternoon? I'm so lost on what these were meant to be to Merlin. Was he simply a madman crazily rambling through the Scottish Highlands, building identical pavilions across the moors and hillocks, hiding them behind 9 different simplistic puzzles? To what end? Have I simply gone mad completing all 95 individual puzzles, despite only receiving rewards for the first 52, just to say I have the Platinum Trophy in Hogwarts Legacy? I guess we'll never know. The same criticism could be leveled at most other activities. The demiguise moons, the balloon popping, the platform landing, but the Merlin trials are just so excessive, so tedious, the animation for completing one so long. Kelly Murphy, the lead game designer, said of the Merlin trials, quote, "We wanted a set of micro-puzzles in the Highlands that reinforced spell usage and took very little narrative to propagate outwards. These started as Sphinx puzzles, but ultimately that lore felt out of place in Scotland and were harder to explain than putting the concept behind Merlin. The team felt the famous wizard was easier to get across to players." End quote. It's a classic case of potential wasted in pursuit of content. Imagine if these trials were crafted into a one-off engaging challenge that really deepened your magical prowess and tied into the lore of Merlin himself. Instead, due to how often they're repeated, they serve as a not-so-subtle excuse for the game to force you into tedious busywork. It's as if Hogwarts Legacy is saying, "Yeah, we know our world can feel a bit empty, so here's a barrage of Merlin trials to keep you busy, and your inventory full, to justify the £70 price tag." And this is the real issue with the open world format employed here in Legacy. The size of the world dilutes those moments that do work. Too long, too empty, with too little to do of consequence. The map is enormous, but rather than feeling like a living, breathing, wizarding world, it ends up as a vast, empty wasteland that dilutes the moments that actually work. Those generally centered in the castle or Hogsmeade. Instead of a curated, intimate, single-player RPG, think 15 or 20 hours at most of tightly paced storytelling, we're forced into a tedious 40-hour slog that feels more at home in an MMO designed to keep you grinding for the next microtransaction. Look, MMOs need to keep you around to sell subscriptions and microtransactions. That's the whole commercial model that makes them viable. I've lost a lot of my own life to the grind of Star Wars, the Old Republic, World of Warcraft and Destiny. I still get a twitch whenever I see a desert in a game, the PTSD of slow walking across the dunes of Tatooine without a speeder. Yes, I was a free-to-play player, so I couldn't even run until level 25 in the Old Republic. Mechanical progression is usually emphasized because number goes up keeps people grinding, keeps people in the game. But in a narrative RPG, a single-player game with no microtransactions, this kind of mechanical progression feels misplaced. Instead of engaging gameplay that advances the story, we're treated to a barrage of side quests and repetitive tasks that serve no greater purpose than to artificially pad esoteric offense and defense numbers, and ultimately the runtime. It begs the question, what's the point of this sprawling open world if all it does is distract from the very narrative moments that should define our journey through Hogwarts? I guess Hogwarts Legacy is like an all-you-can-eat buffet, with too many low-value offerings. There's plenty of stuff, but very little that truly satisfies. But, just like a buffet, there are a few great gems that keep you coming back wanting more. Alright, so let's talk about one of the more interesting side quests in Hogwarts Legacy, Tangled Web. The one where you meet Crispin Dunn at the Three Broomsticks, who's worried about his missing friend Mary Portman in the village of Arranshire. At first, the setup shows real promise. You arrive in Arranshire only to find it overrun with giant spiders and thick webs draping every building, a scene that's both eerie and evocative, like something straight out of the French horror film Infested, which I'd highly recommend to horror buffs. In this quest, you eventually descend into the dank, decaying basement of a local home, where you discover a note revealing Mary's tragic fate. She had, ambitiously, taken up spider breeding, seeing the potential to cash in on valuable venom and silk. Using her cavernous cellar as a breeding ground, she set the stage for a dark twist. The colony spiraled out of control, the spiders overran the village, and Mary herself was tragically ensnared in her own webbing. The quest then forces you into the heart of that spider's nest, culminating in a showdown with a giant acromantula, the brood's matriarch. It's a really fun idea of a quest, yet while the quest setup and visuals suggest a deeper, more curated experience, what follows is a missed opportunity from an RPG perspective. When you return to Crispin, the game offers you a choice. Either tell him that Mary was to blame for the infestation, or keep her memory intact by holding back the truth. But, and spoiler alert, this decision ultimately has zero impact on anything. It's a classic example of choice-based gameplay that feels little more like superficial flavor, a microcosm of the wider issue with role-playing elements in this game. This quest demonstrates, to me at least, that the Avalanche team's ambition to flood the world with richly detailed, curated quest lines. The quest is a standout moment that did a great job of building tension and horror, with great environmental storytelling to boot. Even so, the game often struggles to offer this level of evocative quest design in much of its world. I'd be remiss to mention another standout quest, so let's dive into one of Hogwarts Legacy's most unexpectedly chilling quests, minding your own business. I think it's worth noting that this gem was, questionably, a PlayStation exclusive until June 2024. I'm not one to care that much about commercial exclusivity, but it's a real shame that so many of us were barred from this atmospheric delight simply because of our choice of console. It doesn't matter so much anymore, I suppose, but these sorts of deals are a sore deal for customers, especially as this quest truly is one of the standout highlights of the game. The quest kicks off with an almost unassuming encounter. A house elf outside a seemingly abandoned shop in Hogsmeade beckons you to investigate. What seems like a simple errand soon spirals into a narrative steeped in dread and twisted humor. You meet Cassandra Mason, the enigmatic shop owner whose exceedingly fair deal hides more than it reveals. Her bargain? Buy the shop now, at a discounted price. But you'll have to sell it back to her if you can't make it work. The catch? Well, we're not immediately privy to that particular wrinkle. At the back of the shop lies a secret that screams classic horror. A mysterious chest that opens into a TARDIS-like space, infinitely larger than its unassuming exterior would suggest. Here, the atmosphere thickens with tension as you step into a dark, labyrinthine cellar that feels less like a storage space and more like a scene straight out of a haunted hotel. Rooms loop infinitely, corridors twist and change when you're not looking, and mannequins come alive in the peripheral darkness. All masterful nods to the horror genre that many other quests in the game sadly lack. It seems Mrs. Mason was trying to swindle us by trapping us in the labyrinthine cellar below the shop, at the mercy of Fastidio, a bored and mischievous poltergeist. But the poltergeist isn't just content with unsettling you. He challenges you to a deadly game of dodging and strategy. Whether you're navigating the warped library, where logic and the lights are on a permanent coffee break, or the abandoned atrium lit by eerie floating lanterns, Fastidio's antics keep you on edge. The challenge escalates in a graveyard scene where Fastidio transforms into a swirling, furniture-laden menace. This final form, a twisted, reskinned troll mini-boss, manages to be both terrifying and darkly humorous. After laying him low, the player and Fastidio come to an agreement. He can haunt the shop once a month in return for our freedom, and ownership of the shop the rest of the time. As we finally taste freedom in the first time in what seems like an age. Seriously, this is a long quest. There's a retribution to be had. It's time to confront Cassandra Mason about her crimes. She must answer for what she's done, and not just to us, but to the others who came before us. How many aspiring shop owners did she send to St. Mungo's? Officer Singer will accompany us to keep the peace and uphold the law, something she's been so good at up to this point. A brief duel with Cassandra, aided by Officer Singer, ties up the loose ends of this twisted tale. In the end, you regain control of the shop, and are even given a choice regarding the fate of Penny, the house elf. Although both decisions here, to free her or no, seem to loop back to the same basic outcome. The lingering horror of that labyrinth and Fastidio's haunting mischief remain etched in the memory, long after you walk away. In minding your own business, Hogwarts Legacy ventures boldly into horror territory, blending clever game mechanics with an atmosphere so thick you can almost taste the dread. It's a standout quest that not only challenges your reflexes but also dares you to question every shadow and shifting corridor. Even if the choices feel a little redundant in the end, the experience is a masterclass in turning a seemingly benign side quest into a journey through madness. The priorities of the developers are, frankly, questionable. Here we have this enormous open-world map. A monumental achievement in itself, no doubt, given the resources required to build it, but it's glaringly underpopulated with meaningful content, like those quests that I've highlighted. It's like they constructed an immense stage and then ran out of time, or worse, forgot to write a compelling script for it. Instead of investing those resources in a vast, empty expanse, why not trim down the map and focus on what truly matters in a Harry Potter game? The magic of Hogwarts lies in its intricate school life, its iconic characters, and its richly woven lore. Elements that could have been front and center, creating a more immersive and engaging experience. Rather than scattering filler content across a sprawling landscape, a more concentrated approach would have brought out the best of what the Wizarding world has to offer, I think. Adding insult to injury is just how the open world's design further emphasizes the deficiencies of the combat system. Tedious encounters with creatures and dark wizards pepper the landscape, but they lack the challenge and variety necessary to keep them engaging. The ability to simply escape via broomstick, a convenience reminiscent of Torrent in Elden Ring, renders these encounters feeling arbitrary and inconsequential. Instead of presenting genuine high-stakes battles, the game offers a safety valve that trivializes conflict, undermining the potential for tension and meaningful progression. It's a double-edged sword, I suppose. While I'm definitely grateful for the option to avoid the repetitive combat, it also strips the world of any real risk, leaving these encounters as little more than forgettable, extraneous diversions. The result is a disjointed experience, where the lovingly detailed design of Hogwarts Castle and the vibrant artistry of the Highlands sharply contrast with a barren, repetitive open-world environment. The areas outside the castle, no matter how visually striking, fail to deliver on the same level of detail. Instead of a seamless, impressive, immersive journey through a magical world, you're forced to navigate vast, underpopulated spaces filled with trivial tasks and hollow combat scenarios. I'm definitely risking starting to sound like a broken record, but Hogwarts Legacy's RPG and progression systems feel like missed opportunities to deliver the dynamic, player-driven growth that I was expecting from a modern wizarding adventure. By that I mean, the leveling mechanics are almost a literal measure of how many quests you've ticked off, rather than reflecting your mastery of the magical arts. Reaching level 34, the soft cap necessary to trigger the end-of-year cutscene, requires you to slog through so many side activities. I ended up completing the main Ranrok story at level 27, a deep mistake as I'd come to find out all too quickly. I had triumphed over evil. Well, okay, I consumed that evil for myself. As any self-respecting Slytherin, I'm all about ambition and power. I'm sure Fig would understand. I wondered where this choice would take Eleanor. Surely I'm evil now, right? Well, not quite. The only narrative reward for this story beat, as it turned out, was to be forced into a tedious grind for completing the myriad fetch quests and minor tasks I'd elected to ignore for being a waste of time. I don't in principle hate fetch quests. The Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk are two of my favourite games of all time. Filled with quests that boil down to go here, kill the guy or steal the thing and leave. But those games offer great writing, the narrative reward for completing them. They're also completely optional, and generally have branching narrative consequences for your choices. Not so in Hogwarts Legacy. Here, in order to see the end credits, just to be able to finish the main story quest, every single quest seemingly needs to be ticked off, completely derailing the pacing and any sense of stakes the story had managed to build up. Compounding this issue, the game is completely unprepared to offer any sort of resolution for any of my choices throughout the adventure, big or small. So why offer the choice in the first place? Most RPGs are built on the promise, or rather the illusion of choice. That feeling where your decisions are shaping your destiny, where your opinions actually matter. You assert yourself in the world, and you can steer the narrative into a direction that feels uniquely yours. I say illusion not derogatorily, but as recognition of the obvious limits of the video game medium. It's not like you're in a tabletop RPG with a human DM who lets you derail the story into wild side adventures whenever you fancy a detour after too many beers and late night sessions. When all he really wants is to get your party up the Icespire peak to slay the dragon and wrap the campaign up. No. In the best RPGs, you still end up at the same destination broadly. But typically, you're so engrossed by quality writing and clever misdirection that it feels like you've truly asserted yourself on the narrative. Now, Hogwarts Legacy, it flat out says no to that promise in the most glaring, disappointing way I've personally ever felt in a video game. The game's chosen genre is meant to offer a deep, immersive role-playing experience, but instead it feels like a shallow, pre-packaged story. The reality is, with budgetary and time constraints, many of the truly engaging features end up on the cutting room floor. But here, the effects of those constraints are impossible to ignore. The choices feel as hollow as a scripted ride through a theme park. You're funneled along predetermined paths without any real freedom to shape your own narrative. No way to impose your own personality onto the world and have characters offer competing, compelling views of the world. While the best RPGs provide that compelling illusion of choice that makes you feel like you're directing the crunch of the story, Hogwarts Legacy is a stark reminder that sometimes the medium's promise can be let down in the harshest ways possible. It's a disappointing, shallow offering that left me yearning for the kind of immersive, player-driven experiences that truly matter. As if to prove my point, let's take a look at the structure of the endgame. Instead of savoring the dramatic climax of choosing your character's path, you're dragged kicking and screaming back into an open-world slog, which not only undermines the narrative's impact but also leaves you with a final cutscene that feels unearned, disappointing, and frankly underwhelming after having it arrive so late following the Ranrok boss fight. I never know how much to take from the stats on Steam achievements, but at least to date, only 16% of players have actually bothered to see the end of the main questline, compared with 29% having beaten Ranrok. Now that feels incredibly low. Almost half of those that bothered beating Ranrok, the final boss, haven't done that last little grind. But I can't say I blame them. You've just embraced the dark side or, I guess, been a boring good guy, but instead of that meaning anything at all, you're told, you haven't quite completed your field guide just yet. Get back out there. Look, Weasley, I've just become the most powerful dark wizard of all time. My OWLs can wait. The skill tree is intended to offer a sense of personalization and growth, but in practice it barely alters the core gameplay. Sure, you might unlock some small tweaks, Accio pulling in an extra enemy or Descendo gaining an AoE effect, but these adjustments are more cosmetic than transformative. The Dark Arts branch offers a notable exception with the Avada Kedavra improvement, killing all curse debuffed enemies, and being able to spread the curse debuff more effectively, but this feels like a rare bright spot in an otherwise uninspired system. Equally, I just can't reiterate the narrative dissonance of incentivizing the use of the killing curse enough. Within this system, there's little room for crafting distinct builds or experimenting with radically different playstyles, which can make the magic feel as generic as a pre-packaged spell kit. Perhaps most frustrating is how the leveling system interacts with combat. Enemies that are arbitrarily above your current level become frustratingly resilient, taking minimal damage and dealing disproportionate amounts in return. This sort of enemy scaling isn't just a minor oversight, it creates a balancing nightmare that undermines that sense of progression. Rather than feeling like you're growing stronger over time, you're constantly forced to tiptoe around poorly balanced encounters. Comparatively, a fixed scale model, similar to the approach seen in Dark Souls, might have offered a more satisfying and predictable measure of your growth, where every new level genuinely feels like it enhances your power and tactical options in some way. I'm perfectly willing to accept this might just be a me issue, but one of the most jarring aspects of Hogwarts Legacy for me was the reliance on a conventional randomized loot drop system, complete with the ubiquitous green, blue, purple, gold rarity tiers that stands in stark contrast to the promise of unique lore-rich gear that this game sometimes offers. This design choice constantly undercuts my investment in the character that I'm building in several critical ways. In a universe as richly detailed as the Harry Potter universe, every artifact or piece of gear should feel like it carries a piece of its storied history, a unique tale woven into the fabric of that particular piece or garment. Instead, the game reduces magical equipment to a generic loot system, where gear is assigned an arbitrary color-coded rarity that doesn't tie back to any meaningful narrative or purpose. It's just a number to go up constantly. This disconnect not only diminishes the allure of discovering something truly unique, but also makes the gear feel disposable, mass-produced by a system that treats each item as just another roll of the dice. Easy to pick up, easy to throw away. The randomized loot system, with its tiered progression from common through to legendary, is a trope that we've seen in countless action RPGs, from everything from Borderlands through to Destiny. While this structure might work in fast-paced, loot-driven titles, it feels out of place in a game rooted in the nuanced magic of Hogwarts. Instead of empowering the player with artifacts that reflect their journey and personal growth, the loot drops feel arbitrary. The promise of discovering unique gear that could significantly alter gameplay or provide deep immersion is diluted by the reality that most gear is simply another variation on the same theme: stat boosts and minor cosmetic differences. This chest, hidden deep within Salazar Slytherin's scriptorium, yeah, just another scarf. For me, this not only makes the effort required to grind for these items feel unrewarding, but also chips away at the believability of the magical world. Hogwarts Legacy is built on the foundation of a meticulously crafted world where every element should reinforce the sense of wonder and history. I'd expect to find magical artifacts that resonate with the lore of the series, maybe wands with unique cores, or enchanted robes with personal backstories, or maybe even ancient relics imbued with specific spells or curses. Instead, I was met with a loot table that feels more akin to a generic dungeon crawler. Moreover, this approach has a ripple effect on the gameplay itself. The grind associated with chasing rare drops becomes a mechanical necessity, rather than an organic part of the magical journey that you're on. Rather than feeling like an adventurer discovering long-forgotten treasures, I ended up performing repetitive tasks again and again to chase an ever-elusive gold-tier item. This emphasis on quantity over quality ultimately detracts from the exploration and discovery elements that should define an open-world Hogwarts experience. Hogwarts Legacy, for me, stands as a fascinating study in contrasts. Its soaring narrative ambitions and its glaring mechanical shortcomings are two sides of the same coin. On one hand, the game reaches for the stars, offering a rich tapestry of magical lore, vibrant characters and awe-inspiring visuals that capture the enduring magic of Hogwarts. On the other hand, its execution leaves us with a final product that feels over-ambitious and lacking in execution. The game's narrative is a wild blend of epic, world-saving battles and intimate school-based adventures. Characters like Ranrok and Isidora promise deep, morally complex stories, but their arcs are undermined by forced choices and underdeveloped consequences. Meanwhile, Poppy's heartwarming quest, steeped in friendship, loyalty, and small-scale heroics, reminds me of the true spirit of the wizarding world, even if it sits uneasily beside its darker counterparts. Mechanically, the same tension persists. The castle and Hogsmeade are masterpieces of art and atmosphere, brimming with enchanting little details that invite exploration and wonder. Yet, beyond the gates of Hogwarts, the open-world design devolves into a sprawling, repetitive expanse filled with generic tasks and tedium. The RPG progression system, with its predetermined leveling and grindy side quests, further disrupts the pacing, forcing players to wade through monotonous activities just to hit a capstone moment that ultimately feels unearned. Even the loot system, with its tiered, color-coded rarities, fails to deliver on the promise of unique, lore-rich gear, leaving my hard-won treasures feeling all too disposable. I guess Hogwarts Legacy feels something like a patchwork of different games thrown together. At times, it aspires to be a Witcher 3-esque adventure, hunting creatures through the wilds, battling bandits in their camps, and wandering through quaint little villages. Yet, it rarely reaches the narrative heights of that game, of course. Then there are the moments that resemble those educational interludes from recent Assassin's Creed titles, where you're just a tourist in a digital museum. Only here, that museum is a recreated Hogwarts, a fictional space that, despite its charm, lacks the tangible intrigue of a real place. The game's reliance on scavenger hunt lore, picking up little tidbits around the castle, often feels trivial and superficial, rarely offering anything a dedicated fan wouldn't already know. Ultimately, Hogwarts Legacy never seems to commit to one cohesive experience. It doles out half-hearted teasers of adventure, exploration, and mystery, but never delivers enough on any one element to truly satisfy. So while Hogwarts Legacy captures flashes of the magic that made Harry Potter so beloved, its missteps in narrative coherence and gameplay mechanics leave it as a flawed imagining of the wizarding world. It's a game that reminds us that true magic isn't just in the spellbinding visuals or epic battles. It lies in the seamless interweaving of story and gameplay, where every choice and every artifact carries weight. Perhaps one day, future installments will finally strike that perfect balance. Until then, Hogwarts Legacy remains an intensely interesting, wildly ambitious, and incredibly imperfect chapter in the ever-evolving lore of the Wizarding world. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.